The tale of Joseph from the Good Book. It's the creme de la creme of biblical narratives for me. While tales of King David, Elijah, Elisha, and others have their charm, there's something about the dreamer, Joseph, that resonates. Perhaps it's personal. After all, I bear Joseph as one of my middle names. Or perhaps it's the sheer emotional depth of his story that tugs at one's heartstrings. Now, any scholar worth their salt knows that the Genesis account tips its hat to ancient Near Eastern myths, drawing threads from Egyptian, Ugaritic, Akkadian, Mesopotamian, and Canaanite Phoenician lore. That's old news in academia. But here's where it gets spicy. The idea that Genesis might have been sipping from the same cultural cocktail as Homer's Odyssey and Iliad, or that it was influenced by Greek myths alongside these ancient Near Eastern tales? Well, that's a harder sell in scholarly circles. Enters Bruce Loudon and his intriguing tome, Homer's Odyssey and the Near East. Inspired by his insights, I aim to shed light on his perspective regarding the Joseph narrative, and to just set the record straight based on feedback from my previous videos. I'm not suggesting that the authors of Genesis were simply cribbing notes from the Greeks. Quite the opposite. Loudon posits that the Greeks were taking cues from the Near East long before the ink dried on Genesis. Quite the plot twist, isn't it? As Loudon expresses it, quote, "My study demonstrates that the genres of myth that comprise the Odyssey are also extant in Near Eastern cultures, often in Gilgamesh, but most frequently in Old Testament myth. Why do commentators usually omit consideration of the substantial parallels between Homeric and Old Testament myth? Modern audiences may even, without realizing it, project their beliefs onto how to read the ancient texts, given the long dominance of Christianity and Judaism in the West. A majority of modern Western audiences, whether consciously or unconsciously, may, on the basis of their faith, regard biblical and Homeric narratives as opposites, seeing the former as, quote, true or real, but the latter as false, unreal, or fiction. Intentionally or unintentionally, faith has erected a wall between the study of the two narrative traditions. I ask readers, therefore, to consider the parallels I adduce and the arguments proposed concerning them as objectively as possible. And in case you're curious what is meant by myth, Loudon continues, I define myth as a sacred tradition, narrative that depicts the interrelations of mortals and gods, is especially concerned with defining what is moral or ethical behavior for a given culture, and passes on key information about that culture's traditions and institutions. My definition should be thought of as applying best to ancient Near Eastern texts, including Gilgamesh, the Enuma Elish, and other Mesopotamian narratives, the Ugaritic Kurta, and the Akkad, the Bible, especially the Old Testament, European epics, including the Odyssey, Iliad, Argonautica, and Aeneid, Hesiod, Greek tragedy, the Mahabharata, and the Ramayana, and some later epics such as Beowulf and Paradise Lost. As Loudon expresses in the opening of his book, the Odyssey's larger plot is composed of a number of distinct genres of myth, all of which are extant in various Near Eastern cultures, Mesopotamian, West Semitic, Egyptian. Unexpectedly, the Near Eastern culture with which the Odyssey has the most parallels is the Old Testament. Consideration of how much of the Odyssey focuses on non-heroic episodes, hosts receiving guests, a king disguised as a beggar, recognition scenes between long-separated family members, reaffirms the Odyssey's parallels with the Bible. In particular, his book argues that the Odyssey is in a dialogic relationship with Genesis, which features the same three types of myth that comprise the majority of the Odyssey: theoxany, romance, Joseph in Egypt, and Argonautic myth, Jacob winning Rachel from Laban. The Odyssey also offers intriguing parallels to the book of Jonah and Odysseus' treatment by the suitors offers close parallels to the Gospel's depiction of Christ in Jerusalem. Let's now take a brief look at the life of Joseph. The life of Joseph in Genesis. Joseph, one of the 12 sons of Jacob, also known as Israel, is a central figure in the latter part of the book of Genesis. Born to Jacob's favorite wife Rachel, Joseph was deeply loved by his father, which stirred jealousy among his brothers. This favoritism was further exacerbated when Jacob gifted Joseph a multicolored coat, a symbol of distinction. As a young man, Joseph had 2 significant dreams that predicted his future rise to power. In these dreams, his brothers' sheaves of wheat bowed to his sheaf, and the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed to him. These visions suggested that his family would one day bow to him, further fueling his brothers' resentment. Seizing an opportunity, his brothers plotted against him, initially planning to kill him. However, they eventually decided to sell him into Egyptian slavery and deceive their father by dipping Joseph's coat in goat's blood, leading Jacob to believe that a wild animal had killed his beloved son. In Egypt, Joseph faced both prosperity and adversity. He was initially sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, and quickly rose to a position of trust due to his integrity and God-given ability to interpret dreams. However, after rejecting the advances of Potiphar's wife and being falsely accused of impropriety, Joseph was imprisoned. While incarcerated, Joseph accurately interpreted the dreams of 2 fellow prisoners, which eventually led to his introduction to Pharaoh. When Pharaoh experienced troubling dreams, Joseph was summoned. He interpreted them as 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of famine, and advised Pharaoh to store grain during the prosperous years. Impressed, Pharaoh elevated Joseph to the position of vizier, second only to himself in the Egyptian hierarchy. The predicted famine affected not only Egypt, but also Canaan, where Joseph's family resided. His brothers traveled to Egypt in search of food, unknowingly encountering Joseph. After a series of tests and trials, Joseph revealed his identity to his brothers. The family was reunited, and Jacob, along with his entire household, settled in Egypt's Goshen region. The story of Joseph concludes with his death in Egypt, but not before he made the Israelites promise to carry his bones back to Canaan. When they eventually left Egypt, Joseph's narrative is a tale of betrayal and redemption, showcasing God's providence and the idea that what humans intend for evil, God can use for good. Joseph romance myth. The epic poem, The Odyssey, by Homer, and the biblical story of Joseph share a common narrative structure known as romance. In both tales, the protagonist embarks on a journey physically and emotionally that eventually leads them back home. This narrative arc, in the Odyssey, the overarching theme is Odysseus' return from Troy, which serves as a framework for various subgenres of myths, including theophany and romance. Theophany deals with the divine hospitality and is concluded when Odysseus defeats the suitors. Romance, on the other hand, is a narrative that focuses on a virtuous protagonist who, due to some mistake or circumstance, is separated from his family and ends up in a foreign, often magical land. The gods assist in reuniting him with his family, and his return is often seen as a triumph over death. This structure of romance is not unique to the Odyssey. It also finds resonance in the biblical story of Joseph, who is separated from his family and ends up in Egypt. Like Odysseus, Joseph is a virtuous man, favored by a higher power, God in this case, and his eventual return to his family is miraculous and laden with emotional recognition scenes. Both narratives also share an idealistic, almost unrealistic, moral structure. Characters are either good or evil, and the virtuous are rewarded while the immoral are punished. This moral dichotomy is not just a feature of ancient myths, but can be seen in modern storytelling as well, such as in the classical film It's a Wonderful Life. Romance narratives and myths share a common theme: the miraculous return This theme is evident in stories of heroes like Heracles and Theseus, who come back from the land of the dead. The idea of returning from apparent death is a foundational aspect of myths. Defining romance in the Odyssey. In the context of the Odyssey, romance can be described as a story where the main character is morally upright and favored by the gods. Due to a mistake, the protagonist is separated from their family or an extended period, often trapped in a foreign magical land. This separation often draws parallels with being in the underworld. With the gods' assistance, the protagonist reunites with their family, who believe them to be dead. The protagonist's return, laden with treasures, symbolizes triumph over death. The climax often involves a touching reunion with a loved one. The narrative world rewards the good and punishes the wicked per divine will. The story depicts a full circle ending in a reunion that signifies healing and restoration for the protagonist. The global influence of romance in ancient narratives, from Greece to Egypt. Greek literature is often considered the richest source of romantic narratives, with the Odyssey being one of the earliest examples. However, the concept of romance is not confined to Greek culture alone. Ancient Indian literature, for example, features the classical Sanskrit drama Shakuntala, which even includes a Greek character, suggesting cultural ties between the two civilizations. The term Yavani in Shakuntala is akin to the Old Testament's term for Greeks, Yavan. Both terms trace back to Ion or Ionic. Romance, as a narrative structure, has remained remarkably consistent over time, appearing in works from Euripides to Shakespeare. This consistency allows us to draw parallels between different cultures and time periods, helping us understand how the same motifs are employed in various narratives, including the Odyssey and the biblical story of Joseph. The Egyptian connection. The Near East, particularly the narratives from this region, offers a rich backdrop for understanding romance. One of the most parallel stories to the Odyssey from this region is the tale of Joseph from Genesis. But before diving into the similarities, it's worth noting the thematic links both Greek and Israelite romances share with Egypt. Egypt is not only the central setting for Joseph's story, but also features prominently in the Odyssey, especially in Menelaus' adventures. Later Greek romances like Euripides' Helen and Heliodorus, an Ethiopian story, further strengthen this connection with Egypt. Romance often thrives on exotic settings, and Egypt has historically been that default backdrop. However, the relationship between romance and Egypt might be more profound. Some ancient Egyptian tales predating the Joseph narrative hint that romance elements might have Egyptian roots. The tale of Sinuhe. This story revolves around Sinuhe, a royal attendant who, fearing political unrest, flees Egypt for Byblos, eventually settling among the Hyksos in Asia. Over time, he rises to prominence, even defeating a renowned warrior. However, after a generation away from home, nostalgia grips him. He wishes to return to Egypt, and with the pharaoh's blessing, does so, leaving his family behind in Asia. This tale introduces motifs familiar in romance: a prolonged absence, prosperity after hardship, and an emotional homecoming. Yet it misses out on some classic romance elements, like the emotional family reunion. The shipwrecked sailor in this narrative, a court attendant, recounts his past adventures to uplift his disheartened superior. He speaks of a voyage where a sudden storm wrecks his ship, sparing only him. He finds himself on a paradisiacal island, abundant with food as if magically cultivated. The island he discovers is governed by a prophetic serpent. The serpent assures him of a 4-month stay on the island and advises him not to fret. Quote, If you are brave and control your heart, you shall embrace your children. You shall kiss your wife. You shall see your home. It is better than everything else. The Shipwrecked Sailor, lines 133 to 35, end quote. The Shipwrecked Sailor and the Odyssey. In the tale of the Shipwrecked Sailor, the protagonist promises to honor the serpent god with sacrifices upon his return home, specifically by offering oxen. However, the wise serpent dismisses the need for such gestures. As foretold by the serpent, after 4 months, a ship arrives to take the sailor back to his homeland. Gratefully, before his departure, the serpent bestows upon him a wealth of treasures. While the narrative style and main characters of the Shipwrecked Sailor differ from the Homeric epics, there are undeniable similarities with the Odyssey, especially in the realm of romance. The story's central theme of shipwreck and survival mirrors Odysseus' own trials in the Odyssey, particularly in the episodes where he is the lone survivor among his crew. Both tales depict the protagonist finding refuge on idyllic islands overseen by powerful deities. The serpent god in the Shipwrecked Sailor is kind and generous, drawing parallels with Calypso from the Odyssey. Moreover, the prophetic role of the serpent mirrors that of Tiresias in the Odyssey. Given the concise nature of the Shipwrecked Sailor, it's intriguing to see one character embody roles that in the Odyssey are distributed among multiple characters. One of the most striking parallels between the Shipwrecked Sailor and the Odyssey lies in the prophetic words of the serpent god. These prophecies encapsulate the essence of romance, the journey home, and the reunion with loved ones. The serpent's emphasis on self-control encapsulates in the phrase, "If you control your heart, you shall see your home," resonates deeply with a core theme of the Odyssey. This sentiment mirrors Tiresias' prophecy to Odysseus, where the seer emphasizes importance of restraint, especially during the episode on Thrinacia. Here, Odysseus must resist the temptation to consume Helios' sacred cattle. Tiresias' prophecy not only speaks of Odysseus' challenges, but also of his eventual return, flourishing life, and peaceful death in an old age. Similarly, the serpent god's prophecy concludes with a promise of a reunion with the family and a prosperous life, ending with the line, "You will embrace your children. You will flourish at home. You will be buried." The protagonist's return in the Shipwrecked Sailor, laden with treasures gifted by the serpent god, draws parallels with the Phaeacians in the Odyssey, who also aid Odysseus' return journey, bestowing him with gifts. Additionally, the role of the attendant in the Shipwrecked Sailor is reminiscent of Eumaios in the Odyssey. Both characters share personal tells within the larger narrative, providing a deeper context and connection to the main story, Egyptian narratives and their links to the Odyssey. Another interesting Egyptian tale is the tale of the two brothers. This story predates and shares motifs with the biblical account of Joseph and Potiphar's wife. In this narrative, an older brother's wife makes advances toward the younger brother. When he rebuffs her, she falsely accuses him of assault. While the story diverges into different themes and might not fit the traditional mold of romance like the tale of Sinuhe and the Shipwrecked Sailor, it does resonate with the Joseph narrative, especially in the theme of brotherly conflict and separation. Both the tale of Sinuhe and the Joseph story delve into the blending of Egyptian and West Semitic cultures. In the tale of Sinuhe, the protagonist initially perceives a clear distinction between himself and the Asiatics he encounters. This term, Asiatics, likely refers to the West Semitic cultures, which would later encompass the Israelites and what the Greeks termed as Phoenicians. The story even mentions fortifications meant to protect Egypt from these Asiatics. However, as the narrative unfolds, Sinuhe integrates into their culture, and upon his return to Egypt, he's even labeled as an Asiatic. This theme of cultural distinction and eventual assimilation is mirrored in the Odyssey. The epic frequently references the Phoenicians or Sidonians, indicating the Greeks' sense of differentiation from the West Semitic cultures, much like the Egyptians in the tale of Sinuhe. The myth of Joseph and its connection to the Odyssey. An often overlooked parallel to the Odyssey's romantic elements is found in the biblical story of Joseph. While some scholars have touched upon the romantic undertones of Joseph's tale, a comprehensive comparison with the Odyssey's romantic narrative has been largely absent. The story of Joseph can be seen as a romance, albeit without the heroic flair that the Odyssey bestows upon its main character, Odysseus. Instead of heroic adventures, Joseph's story delves into the historical reasons for the Israelites' stay in Egypt and intertwines with the Old Testament tales of patriarchs. Yet, when we set aside the lack of heroism, the similarities between the two narratives become strikingly clear. Both stories encompass the core elements that define romance. Both Odysseus from the Odyssey and Joseph from the Bible are portrayed as virtuous individuals who enjoy the favor of the highest deity. In the Odyssey, Zeus himself acknowledges the sacrifices made by Odysseus during the Trojan War. While Zeus doesn't directly interact with Odysseus in the narrative, it's evident that he supports him in trusting Athena to guide and assist the hero. Odysseus is well aware of his divine backing, even playfully questioning his son Telemachos about whether the combined support of Athena and Zeus would suffice against their adversaries. By the end of the Odyssey, Zeus continues to steer Odysseus' destiny. Similarly, in the biblical story of Joseph, God's favor is a reoccurring theme. From Joseph's early prophetic dreams to his time in Egypt, the narrative consistently highlights God's presence and blessings in his life. Phrases like, "Joseph prospered, for the Lord was with him," and "the Lord blessed the household through Joseph," underscore this divine endorsement. Odysseus, the hero of the Odyssey, finds himself separated from his family for an extended period, often spanning a generation. While the Odyssey doesn't delve into his time at Troy, it's clear that his journey back home is fraught with challenges. These challenges arise primarily from two significant mistakes made by Odysseus. Firstly, after leaving Troy, Odysseus and his crew sacked the city of Eumaios. This act of aggression is met with a violent storm hinting at divine displeasure. However, it's the second error that proves more consequential. While escaping from the Cyclops, Polyphemus, Odysseus taunts him, revealing his true identity. In doing so, he incurs the wrath of Poseidon, the sea god and father of Polyphemus. Odysseus' boastful declaration that even Poseidon couldn't heal the now blinded Cyclops seals his fate. This act of hubris ensures Poseidon's enmity throughout most of the Odyssey. The narrative cleverly alludes to this event early on, ensuring the audience is aware of its significance. Poseidon's anger not only hinders Odysseus' journey home, but also has lasting implications as foretold by the seer, Tiresias. In the Odyssey, divine intervention and wrath play significant roles in shaping the hero's journey. One such instance is the violent storm that Odysseus and his crew encounter after sacking the city of Eumaios. This storm, described in Odyssey 9:79-81, pushes them off course. "And now I would have come to the land of my fathers unharmed, but a wave and the current and the north wind beat me off course as I was rounding the cape of Malea, and drove me on past Kythera." The term used to describe being driven off course is a compound of the word plazo, which in the Odyssey often signifies a god's anger towards a mortal. In this context, it particularly alludes to Poseidon's wrath against Odysseus. However, since this storm occurs before the episode with the Cyclops, Polyphemus, it suggests that another deity, not Poseidon, is expressing their anger. It's posited that the divine displeasure is directed at Odysseus's crew rather than Odysseus himself. The crew's insubordination at Eumaios, where they disobey orders, is seen as the cause of this divine retribution. This act of defiance foreshadows a more severe act of disobedience later in the story at Thrinakia, which results in a storm sent by Zeus that kills all the remaining crew members. Thus, the storm after Eumaios indirectly sets the stage for the encounter with Polyphemus and the subsequent wrath of Poseidon. The two episodes, though distinct, are interconnected in the tapestry of divine interventions that shape Odysseus' journey home. Joseph's mistakes and their consequences. Joseph's journey in the book of Genesis is marked by a series of events that stem from his own actions and the reactions of those around him. Two primary mistakes, or sets of mistakes, shape his narrative. Tensions with his brothers. Joseph's relationship with his brothers is strained from the outset. He is described as bringing negative reports about them to their father, Jacob. This behavior paints him as a tattletale, further alienating him from his siblings. His status as Jacob's favorite son exacerbates the tension. Joseph's dreams in which his brothers bow down to him and his decision to share these dreams with them come across as tactless and arrogant. This series of incidents culminates in his brothers' decisions to sell him into slavery, a motif that also appears in the Odyssey. Potiphar's house in Egypt. Upon arriving in Egypt and serving in Potiphar's house, Joseph's physical attractiveness is emphasized. This trait, combined with his earlier vanity, sets the stage for the subsequent events. Potiphar's wife is attracted to Joseph. When he rejects her advances, she falsely accuses him of rape. This accusation leads to Joseph's imprisonment. Kugel's analysis, who's a scholar, highlights the recurring theme of Joseph's vanity and its consequences. His physical appearance and his pride in it play a significant role in the challenges he faces. The narrative draws parallels between Joseph's behavior with his brothers and his actions in Egypt, suggesting a pattern of behavior that consistently brings about adversity. The narrative of Joseph in the book of Genesis and the story of Odysseus in the Odyssey both incorporate a significant element of romance, which is characterized by a prolonged absence of the protagonist from their home or family. This absence, often spanning a generation, serves as a central motif in romance narratives. Let's look at the duration of absence. In the case of Joseph, there's a clear timeline provided. Joseph is 17 years old when he's sold into slavery. He's 30 when he starts serving Pharaoh. The reunion with his brothers happens in the second year of drought, after 7 years of abundant harvests. This timeline indicates an absence of about 21 to 22 years from his family, which is strikingly similar to the 20-year absence of Odysseus from Ithaca in the Odyssey. Significance of the gap. The generational gap in romances often allows for the protagonist's offspring to grow up and play a significant role in the narrative. This evident in the Odyssey, where Telemachos, Odysseus' son, has a crucial role. In the myth of Joseph, this motif is slightly altered. Instead of focusing on Joseph's offspring, the narrative emphasizes his youngest brother, Benjamin. Benjamin becomes central to the story, especially when Joseph tests his brothers to see if they would treat Benjamin, who is similar to Joseph in being the youngest and a favorite, in the same way they treated him. Romance within a larger context. Just as the Odyssey incorporates elements of romance within the broader epic narrative, the myth of Joseph embeds the romance within the larger patriarchal narrative of Genesis. While the Odyssey's broader narrative deals with the hero's journey and the challenges he faces, the myth of Joseph is intertwined with the history and etiologies of the 12 tribes of Israel. This overarching narrative sometimes influences and modifies the traditional motifs of romance. Both the Odyssey and the myth of Joseph utilize the romance motif of a prolonged absence, adapting and molding it to fit their respective larger narratives and thematic concerns. Odysseus finds himself ensnared in unfamiliar and wondrous territories for a significant duration. The idea of being involuntarily lost in foreign places, which many might confuse with intentional exploration, is a hallmark of romantic tales. Such stories often depict the main character being unintentionally separated from their homeland. In a large portion of his journey, specifically books 5 through 12, Odysseus, in these unfamiliar territories, places not even on the map, struggling to find his way back home. There's a notable incident, his encounter with Polyphemus, where he chooses to explore a shore even when it wasn't necessary. However, this is a rare deviation. Powerful storms, as described in the epilogue, push Odysseus into these situations against his wishes. This isn't a journey by choice. In fact, for most of his time away, 7 out of 10 years, he's held captive by goddess Calypso on the island of Ogygia. Despite her affection for him, she detains him against his desires, a sentiment echoed multiple times in the narrative, drawing a parallel in the story of Joseph, his time in Egypt. A land synonymous with mystery and allure, serves a similar narrative purpose. While Joseph isn't lost in an uncharted territory like Odysseus, he spends a considerable amount of time, even longer than Odysseus, amidst a foreign culture, separated from his family. Both Odysseus and Joseph find themselves the object of affection from powerful women, Calypso and Potiphar's wife, respectively. Their allure to these women results in their confinement. Calypso shares similarities with other goddesses from myths who engage in romantic relationships with mortals. In Greek mythology, goddesses like Eos and Demeter come to mind, and Calypso hints at connections with them. In Near Eastern tales, Ishtar stands out as a notable example. Book 5 of the Odyssey emphasizes these parallels, starting with the scene of Eos parting from her mortal lover, Tithonus. Hainsworth notes that Tithonus, often cited for his beauty, might have an Asian origin to his name. It's common in these tales for a goddess to be captivated by a mortal's beauty. For instance, the Odyssey describes Eos's attraction to another lover, Cleitios, highlighting his beauty as the reason she took him to live among the gods. Eos's romantic pursuits in the Odyssey also involve Tithonus, Cleitos, and Orion. Calypso recounts Orion's tale, emphasizing the envy of the gods when Eos chose him, leading to his tragic end at the hands of Artemis. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the goddess Ishtar is captivated by the hero's appearance after he defeats Humbaba and freshens up. She can't help but admire Gilgamesh's beauty. This admiration is reminiscent of how the Odyssey portrays Eos. The Gilgamesh narrative also lists Ishtar's past mortal lovers, a list that Gilgamesh himself reminds her of when she expresses her interest in him. These past lovers met unfortunate fates, making Gilgamesh wary of her advances. This theme seems to influence later myths, including the stories of Odysseus with Calypso and Joseph with Potiphar's wife. While many draw parallels between Ishtar and Circe, due to Circe's association with animals and her ability to transform men into them, the Odyssey doesn't depict Circe as having the same kind of romantic longing as Calypso, Eos, Demeter, or Ishtar. Unlike Calypso, Circe doesn't try to keep Odysseus against his will. In fact, she only seems to be intimate with him once, following Hermes' guidance. Calypso's desire for Odysseus is so intense, she forces herself on him. Though he was reluctant, he had to spend nights with her in the cave. She wanted it, he didn't. This conflicting dynamic highlights the stark differences in the relationships between Odysseus, Gilgamesh, and Joseph when compared to Calypso, Ishtar, and Potiphar's wife. Often interpretations of Calypso and Circe are romanticized, attributing to them the characteristics not explicitly mentioned in the text. This has led to overlooking some of the more negative aspects of Calypso's character. Potiphar's wife, though not immediately similar to Calypso or Ishtar, shares certain traits with them. Like Ishtar's attraction to Gilgamesh, and Eos' Telemachos, Potiphar's wife, is drawn to Joseph primarily because of his striking appearance. Now, Joseph was handsome in both face and figure, and after a time, his master's wife became infatuated with him. Ephraim Avigdor Speiser, also known as E.A. Speiser, was a Polish-born American world-class Assyriologist who points out an intriguing similarity between the stories of Potiphar's wife and Ishtar. The phrase describing Potiphar's wife's initial attraction to Joseph, which can be translated as, quote, fixed her eye on, end quote, mirrors the same expression used when Ishtar first notices Gilgamesh. This identical phrase is also present in Akkadian when describing Ishtar's interest in Gilgamesh. Potiphar's wife's advances towards Joseph are immediate and direct, reminiscent of Ishtar's approach to Gilgamesh. She doesn't just express her interest once, she's persistent. This persistence mirrors the assertiveness shown by Eos and Calypso in their respective myths. The text states, quote, even though she persisted daily, Joseph resisted her advances, end quote. In a particularly aggressive move, she even grabs Joseph's garment, holding it so firmly that he leaves it behind as he escapes. This forceful act is akin to how the Odyssey portrays Calypso's intense desire for Odysseus. The theme of imprisonment often draws parallels with the concept of the underworld. While Calypso's island, Ogygia, has elements of paradise, it also embodies characteristics of the underworld. This idea isn't new. It's hinted at when Ishtar offers herself to Gilgamesh. Abush suggests, and that's a scholar, that Ishtar's proposal to Gilgamesh isn't just about marriage. She's inviting him to rule the realm of the dead. Even though Gilgamesh declines, the narrative still ties him to themes of death, as seen in the subsequent events leading to Enkidu's demise and Gilgamesh's quest to overcome mortality. Calypso's character and her island seem to be inspired by these older narratives. Many aspects of Ogygia align with traditional depictions of the underworld. For instance, Hermes' visit to Ogygia hints at his usual role associated with guiding souls to the afterlife, further emphasizing the island's connection to the underworld. Additionally, Odysseus' refusal to eat the unique food offered by Calypso mirrors themes from the underworld. As Professor of Classical Studies Gregory Crane points out, this act is reminiscent of Persephone's story and other folklore tales where consuming food from another realm has consequences. The frequent mention of Calypso's dwelling being a cave, a motif often symbolizing the underworld, as seen in Odysseus' escape from Polyphemus' cave, is another clue. It's also worth noting that many characters like Eos' lover Orion and Demeter's lover Laciona, who are mentioned in relation to Calypso's relationship with Odysseus, meet untimely ends. This further strengthens the idea that Odysseus' involuntary stay on Ogygia is akin to being trapped in the underworld. Joseph's extended time in prison, a consequence of Potiphar's wife's desires, plays a pivotal role in his story. Wrongly accused of trying to assault her, Joseph faces years of imprisonment for resisting her advances. We can identify two major missteps in Joseph's journey: conflicts with his brothers and issues in Potiphar's household. While disputes with his brothers lead to his broader confinement in Egypt, his issues with Potiphar's wife result in his imprisonment. These two events share similarities. Initially, his brothers strip him of his attire and cast him into a pit before selling him off. Later, Potiphar's wife takes away his garment and levels accusations that land him in the pit really gel. The act of his brothers throwing him into a pit foreshadows his subsequent imprisonment. This also briefly invokes the idea of descending into the underworld, a theme often present in romantic tales. Scholar Fry highlights this reoccurring motif. Quote, romances often start with a significant drop in social standing, transitioning from wealth to destitution, from entitlement to a fight for existence, or even enslavement. Families get torn apart, end quote. Quote, the overarching theme of descent is characterized by a blurring of identity and limitations on actions. There's an initial disruption in awareness, akin to drifting into sleep, followed by a downward journey to a realm below. This realm can be a place of harshness and confinement, or a prophetic cave. Heroes often find themselves ensnared in mazes or locked away. End quote. In The Winter's Tale, Shakespeare employs a similar narrative device with Hermione's imprisonment. Much like Joseph, Hermione is incarcerated due to a baseless accusation of infidelity. Her time behind bars serves as a prelude to her supposed demise, which spans 16 years. This time lapse mirrors the duration seen in the tales of Joseph and Odysseus. During this period, her newborn daughter, Perdita, matures into a young woman. Odysseus' devoutness earns him the favor of the gods, aiding in his reunion with his loved ones. Zeus acknowledges Odysseus' sacrifices at Troy, painting him as a virtuous individual. In a subsequent divine assembly, Zeus decrees that Hermes will journey to Ogygia to instruct Calypso to release Odysseus. With Athena participating in both these divine discussions, a total of 3 deities play a role in liberating Odysseus from Calypso's grasp. However, in true epic fashion, while Odysseus gains his freedom, he faces the challenge of navigating the seas solo on a self-made raft. He must also showcase his heroism to reach Scheria, a location that serves as a transitional point between Ogygia and Ithaca. Much like Odysseus, Joseph finds his way out of confinement with divine assistance. His unique talent for dream interpretation, which we'll dive into later, catches Pharaoh's eye. This skill not only changes his fate, but also catapults him to a position of prominence. Joseph credits his dream interpretation prowess entirely to divine intervention. In his story, dreams serve as the primary channel through which the divine communicates. Recognizing his abilities, Pharaoh elevates Joseph, even arranging a marriage for him with Asenath, the daughter of the revered priest. This narrative element of a hero marrying a high-born woman is a recurring theme in romantic tales. For instance, Apollonius, in a similar juncture in his story, weds the daughter of King Archistrates. Shakespeare's Pericles, inspired by the Apollonius narrative, mirrors this by having Pericles marry Thaisa, King Simonides' daughter. Both Apollonius and Pericles wed their royal brides after facing shipwrecks and losing everything, drawing parallels to Joseph's life trajectory before his encounter with Pharaoh. The Odyssey also touches upon this theme with the character of Nausicaa. Though Odysseus doesn't end up marrying her, the typical protagonist in these romantic tales, like Joseph, Apollonius, and Pericles, are young unmarried men. Odysseus, being older and more seasoned than Joseph, allows the Odyssey to hint at this theme without fully embracing it. Odysseus, upon his return, is laden with incredible treasures. The Phaeacians, honoring Zeus's earlier proclamation, bestow upon Odysseus wealth that surpasses even the grand loot he would have acquired from Troy, which he unfortunately lost. The Odyssey emphasizes the generosity of the Phaeacians' gift in 3 distinct passages. When Odysseus awakens, disoriented and unaware he's in Ithaca, he worries that the Phaeacians might have taken some of these treasures while he slept. Similarly, Joseph experiences remarkable prosperity while serving Pharaoh. As highlighted earlier, this theme is recurrent in his story, with blessings flowing through Joseph to the entire household, and success accompanying him in all his endeavors. This theme is encapsulated in the name Joseph gives to his second son, Ephraim, meaning, quote, God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering, end quote. This newfound wealth and status also serves as a disguise when Joseph's brothers come to seek his help during the famine. In Joseph's tale, his homecoming is reimagined to explain the origins of the Israelites' settlement in Egypt. Instead of Joseph's returning to his homeland, his family, represented by his brothers, comes to him. However, the traditional narrative finds its way back when Joseph eventually reunites with his father. Both the Odyssey and Joseph's story culminate in heartfelt reunions with their fathers, following earlier recognition scenes with other family members. Joseph and Odysseus triumph over death. The prolonged absence of both protagonists is perceived as a symbolic victory over death. Throughout their tales, both believed to be dead, a recurring theme in many romantic narratives. In the Odyssey, even those closest to Odysseus, like Telemachos and Eumaios, resign themselves to the belief that he's no longer alive. Others, like the suitors, frequently assert his death. Only a few, like Halitherses, hold on to the hope of his return. Similarly, in Joseph's story, when his brothers visit Egypt and encounter Joseph, unaware of his identity, they speak of one brother being quote-unquote lost. This mirrors the irony often found in the Odyssey, where characters reminisce about Odysseus while he's right in front of them in disguise. As Joseph continues to question his brothers, they're reminded of their past actions and express remorse. Quote, "We're surely being punished for what we did to our brother. We ignored his pleas and now we face the consequences." End quote. Reuben added, "I warned you against harming him, but you didn't listen. Now we bear the weight of his blood and must face the repercussions." End quote. Spicer encapsulates the brothers' belief, noting that as far as they're concerned, Joseph met his end in the wilderness near Dothan years ago. Both the Odyssey and Joseph's story crescendo into poignant moments of recognition, where the protagonist emotionally reunites with a family after a long separation. While such climatic reunions are common in romantic tales, the parallels between the Odyssey and Joseph's story are particularly striking. In both narratives, the protagonist initially hides his identity, putting family members through rigorous tests. These encounters are charged with emotion, often leading to tears. Yet there's also an element of seemingly unnecessary harshness from the protagonist. This similarity provides a backdrop to delve into the more debated aspects of Odysseus' reunion with Laertes, which mirrors Joseph's interactions with his brothers in Egypt. By recognition scenes, I refer to the moments when the protagonist, after 2 decades of absence, reunites with his family. Given that he's believed to be dead, the changed circumstances over the years act as a disguise. These scenes are pivotal, marking the protagonist's reconnection with his family identity. Lost since his departure, they symbolize the heart of the happy ending in romantic tales, signifying the restoration of identity. There are various forms of these recognition scenes, depending on certain factors. For instance, is the identity unknown to both parties or just one? How long does the revelation take? Does the reunion occur before or after the protagonist's identity is restored? Which family member is involved? By examining these factors, we can categorize these scenes, identifying which ones share the most similarities and can thus shed light on each other's dynamics. Some of these factors align the Odyssey and Joseph's story with other romances, while others distinguish them. Meanwhile, one factor is unique to the Odyssey. When we look at romance from a wider lens, considering works from Euripides to Kalidas's Shakuntala, the Greek novels, and even Shakespeare, a key distinction emerges: the characters' awareness of each other's identities during their reunions. This distinction splits recognition scenes into 2 main categories. In most ancient romances like Euripides' Ion, Helen, and Iphigenia in Taurus, the story of Apollonius, king of Tyre, and Shakespeare's The Winter's Tale and Pericles, neither character knows the other's true identity during their reunion. However, both the Odyssey and Joseph's story take a different approach. In these tales, the protagonist knows the family member's identity, but hides his own during their initial meetings. This approach is rare. The only other ancient romances that come close are Euripides' Acleistus and Kalidas's Shakuntala, but they offer twists on this theme. In Acleistus, while Admetos doesn't recognize his wife, it's not her doing the concealing. Instead, Heracles, an outsider, plays a role in the mystery. In Shakuntala, the protagonist knows her husband, but he doesn't recognize her due to a curse, not because she's hiding her identity. Another key difference in these romances is the relationship between the main character and the family member they were united with. These reunions can be between a parent and a child, as seen in Euripides' Ion, between a mother and a son, or in Apollonius and Shakespeare's Pericles, between a father and a daughter. They can also be between spouses, like Odysseus and Penelope, Apollonius and his queen, Dushyanta, and Shakuntala. In Shakuntala, Menelaus and Helen in Euripides' Helen, or Leontes and Hermione in The Winter's Tale. Another variation is the reunion between siblings, as seen between Joseph and his brothers, or Iphigenia and Orestes in Euripides' Iphigenia in Taurus. Out of these, the reunion between husband and wife often stands out as the most emotionally charged. This is evident in the climatic moments of the Odyssey, Shakuntala, and the Winter's Tale. In fact, Shakespeare's faced criticism for not emphasizing the reunion between Leontes and his daughter Perdita in the Winter's Tale. However, focusing on the reunion between spouses, in my opinion, was a wise choice due to its profound emotional depth. The time taken for a protagonist to reveal their identity to family members varies. In the Odyssey, Athena's initial disguised encounter with Odysseus sets the standard for later recognition scenes. Knowing Odysseus' identity, she teases him, hinting at his past and delaying the revelation of his location. Once she unveils her true identity, Athena highlights her role in assisting Odysseus with strategies and labels him as someone who tests others, a theme prevalent throughout the epic. This testing characterizes the recognition scenes in both the Odyssey and Joseph's story. Interestingly, while Odysseus' behavior often faces scrutiny, Joseph's similar actions are seldom criticized. In the Odyssey, most recognition scenes involving Odysseus are delayed, with the exceptions being Athena's and Argos' immediate recognitions in books 13 and 17. There are instances where Odysseus doesn't reveal his identity immediately, instead testing the loyalty of family members or servants. These are termed as postponed recognition scenes. A similar pattern is observed in the myth of Joseph, where he tests his relatives before revealing his identity. Such scenes are characteristic of both Odysseus and Joseph, serving as a form of self-identification for the audience. The Odyssey uses 3 types of recognition scenes. 1, immediate recognition. Odysseus is recognized at the start of the encounter. 2, delayed recognition. Odysseus' identity is revealed by the end of the scene. And 3, postponed recognition. Odysseus' identity is disclosed in a subsequent scene. Reversed recognitions, in certain scenes, it's Odysseus who is tested by the other party. Examples include his interactions with Athena in Book 13 and Penelope in Book 23. Timing of recognition relative to the suitor's slaying. Before slaying the suitors, recognition scenes that happen before the defeat of the suitors are preparatory in nature. They involve characters who will assist Odysseus in his confrontation with the suitors. For instance, Athena, Telemachos, Philodius, and Eumaios all play roles in the suitor's downfall, while Eurycleia helps by locking the doors to trap everyone inside. After slaying the suitors, recognition scenes that take place after the suitors have been defeated, such as those with Penelope and Laertes, signify the conclusion of the Odyssey's romance narrative. The Odyssey strategically uses recognition scenes in alignment with broader structural elements of the narrative. These scenes are often paired or mirrored to emphasize thematic or narrative parallels. Athena and Penelope, both scenes in Book 13 and 23, are reversed recognitions, where Odysseus is tested. Both scenes also feature Odysseus bestowing a kiss. Additionally, Athena's scene has parallels with Argos' scene, as they are both immediate recognitions. Eumaios and Telemachos, the episodes with Eumaios in books 14 and 15, are intricately linked with the recognition scene with Telemachos in book 16. Eurycleia and Penelope. The recognition with Eurycleia in Book 19 is related to the postponed recognition with Penelope, framing the scenes in Books 17 and 18, where the suitors mistreat Odysseus. Penelope and Laertes, the final recognition scenes with Penelope in Book 23 and Laertes in Book 24, complement each other, forming a cohesive unit post the suitors' defeat. Athena's unique recognition in the Odyssey, Book 13. When Odysseus encounters Athena in Book 13 of the Odyssey, it's a unique twist on the typical recognition scenes found throughout the poem. Unlike other scenes, Athena instantly knows who Odysseus is. Given that she's a goddess and his guide, this immediate recognition might seem expected. However, this isn't the norm for other recognition moments in the story. In this particular scene, it's Athena who wears an unbreakable disguise, not Odysseus. This is a stark contrast to other scenes, She even tests Odysseus, which is a reversal of roles in most other recognition moments. While Odysseus doesn't wear a physical disguise here, he does use words to mask his identity. He starts the conversation with a made-up story presenting a fictional version of himself. After a bit of playful banter and listening to Odysseus' lengthy fabricated story, Athena finally reveals her true form. She transforms into a tall, beautiful woman, known for her excellent skills. This scene sets the stage, introducing the various elements and behaviors that will be seen in subsequent recognition scenes in the Odyssey. Eumaios and the delayed discovery. In the Odyssey's books 14 and 15, we witness a classic recognition scene orchestrated by Athena. Here, Odysseus takes on the appearance of an older, bald man in tattered clothing. This transformation ensures he remains incognito, allowing him the freedom to gauge Eumaios' loyalty and present himself as a beggar. Odysseus, known for his mastery in deception, has used disguises before, such as when he posed as an old beggar to spy on Troy, and most notably when he conceived the Trojan horse strategy. Despite Odysseus' disguise, Eumaios frequently speaks of the supposedly missing king. Through their interactions, Odysseus gets to witness firsthand Eumaios' unwavering loyalty and dedication. Eumaios even expresses a deep longing for Odysseus' return, valuing it over reuniting with his own family. But why doesn't Odysseus reveal his true identity to Eumaios? There's a recurring theme in the Odyssey about the dangers of revealing Odysseus' identity prematurely. For instance, during the Trojan horse incident, Antichlos almost exposes their plan when he almost responds to Helen imitating the voices of the Greeks' wives. This theme is echoed when Eurycleia nearly reveals Odysseus' identity to Penelope, only to be stopped by Athena's timely intervention. Given Eumaios' close ties with Penelope and his role as her confidant, Odysseus fears that Eumaios might unintentionally spill the beans. This concern is further highlighted when, after Odysseus discloses his identity to Telemachos, Athena expresses worry that Eumaios might inadvertently reveal the secret to Penelope if he sees Odysseus without his beggar disguise. Eumaios' backstory as presented in the Odyssey is a captivating narrative within the larger epic, drawing striking parallels with the biblical tale of Joseph. A central theme in both stories is the tragic fate of being sold into slavery. Surprisingly, Eumaios isn't just an ordinary swineherd, he's the son of a king. This royal lineage mirrors Joseph's unique position as a favored son in his family. The betrayal in Eumaios' story comes from a trusted Phoenician nurse in his father's household. She deceives young Eumaios, handing him over to Phoenician traders in exchange for her passage back to her family. This act of betrayal by someone close is reminiscent of Joseph's own brothers selling him into slavery. Interestingly, the Phoenician nurse herself had once been a victim, having been abducted and sold into slavery by the Taphians. This adds another layer of complexity to the narrative, similar to the multiple instances of trading in Joseph's story. While Eumaios' journey into slavery begins with the Phoenicians, it ends when they sell him to Laertes. And just like many romantic tales, Eumaios' story promises a hopeful resolution. However, at this juncture in the Odyssey, both his personal tale and the overarching recognition scene with Odysseus remain unfinished. Telemachos' delayed recognition. Upon Telemachos' return from his meeting with Nestor and Menelaus, he makes his way to Eumaios' hut. This setting links Telemachos' recognition scene with Eumaios' earlier delayed recognition of Odysseus. The narrative is intricately woven, with Eumaios playing a pivotal role in both scenes. Odysseus, with his keen observation, notices someone approaching Eumaios' hut. The dog's silence gives away the visitor's familiarity. This moment, where Odysseus deduces the identity of the newcomer, adds a layer of pre-recognition, hinting at the multifaceted recognitions about to unfold. Upon entering, Telemachos is warmly greeted by Eumaios. The swineherd's emotional reception, likened to a reunion between a father and a son, evokes the intense feelings typically reserved for the peak of a recognition scene. This sentiment is further emphasized when Telemachos addresses Eumaios as father. After a brief exchange and update about the disguised Odysseus, Telemachos instructs Eumaios to inform Penelope of his safe return, underscoring Eumaios' trusted position in the palace. With Eumaios away, Athena makes her appearance, described in a manner reminiscent of her earlier revelation to Odysseus in Book 13. This consistent description hints at the formulaic nature of recognition scenes in the Odyssey. Athena then restores Odysseus to his usual appearance before making her exit. Upon Odysseus' return into Eumaios' hut, he unveils his true identity to Telemachos. However, the sudden transformation leaves Telemachos startled, leading him to suspect the figure before him might be a deity. The dialogue between them emphasizes this confusion. "I am not some god, but I am your father." This exchange not only highlights Telemachos' initial disbelief, but also underscores Odysseus' godlike appearance. Telemachos' uncertainty is a common feature in the Odyssey's recognition scenes. Typically, a tangible sign such as Odysseus' thigh scar, the marital bed, or the trees he planted with Laertes would serve as proof of identity. However, Telemachos lacks such a reference point since he was merely a baby when Odysseus left. Drawing a parallel with Eumaios' scene, Telemachos' skepticism mirrors the swineherd's earlier disbelief in Odysseus' promised return. It's only when Odysseus attributes his transformation to Athena's intervention that Telemachos is convinced. This recognition scene with Telemachos is significant, as it ties in with later scenes involving Penelope in Book 23 and Laertes. Notably, these three characters are the only ones who recognize Odysseus outside of his beggar disguise. Tears and the act of crying play a significant role in the Odyssey, especially during moments of recognition. This emotional response is first evident when Odysseus reveals his identity to Telemachos. Surprisingly, Odysseus, often portrayed as the epitome of stoicism, sheds tears. This raw display of emotion underscores the profound feelings stirred during these reunions, yet Telemachos remains skeptical, even in the face of his father's tears. This initial hesitance from Telemachos foreshadows Penelope's even more guarded reaction in Book 23. Once Telemachos becomes convinced of Odysseus' identity, thanks to the mention of Athena's involvement, he too is overcome with emotion. The father and son embrace, both shedding tears. However, their shared grief becomes so intense that it threatens to consume their time and focus. The narrator emphasizes this potential pitfall with a series of what-if scenarios. Quote, "And now the light of the sun would have set while they were mourning, had not Telemachos at once addressed his father." Quote, "And now the light of the sun would have set while they were mourning, had not Odysseus himself restrained them and spoke." Quote, "And now the rosy-fingered dawn would have appeared while they were mourning, had not Athena, the gray-eyed goddess, thought about other things." End quote. These passages serve as a poignant reminder of the deep emotional resonance of recognition scenes in the Odyssey. They highlight the balance between the joy of reunion and the need to remain focused on the challenges ahead. Argos' heartfelt recognition of Odysseus. Among all the mortals in the Odyssey, Argos stands out. The loyal dog instantly identifies his master Odysseus, drawing a parallel with Athena's immediate recognition in Book 13. These two instances are unique in their immediate acknowledgement. The narrative cleverly sets the stage for this touching reunion. Before meeting Telemachos, Odysseus observes that Eumaios' dogs don't bark at an approaching figure, indicating their familiarity with the person. Later, when Athena approaches, only Odysseus and the dogs sense her presence, while Telemachos remains oblivious. These moments emphasize the dog's keen perception and ability to recognize. As Odysseus and Eumaios draw near, Argos perks up his ears, reminiscent of Odysseus' earlier attentive listening. But before the reunion unfolds, the narrative delves into Argos' backstory and current state. This technique of building suspense by interspersing background details is also employed during Eurycleus' recognition scene, where Odysseus' scar and name are elaborated upon. Once the background is set, Argos' recognition is immediate and heartfelt. He wags his tail and drops his ears in sheer excitement, embodying the profound emotions stirred by such reunions. This reaction mirrors earlier descriptions of Odysseus' interactions with Eumaios' dogs. As Odysseus acknowledges Argos, he's moved to tears, discreetly hiding them from Eumaios. This subtle display of emotion foreshadows his initial interaction with Penelope. However, the reunion is bittersweet. Weakened by age and neglect, Argos passes away right after recognizing Odysseus. While some might find this confluence of recognition and death overly dramatic, it's a classic trope in ancient recognition tales, echoing sentiments found even in the biblical story of Joseph. Odysseus and Penelope, a delayed reunion. In Homer's Odyssey, Book 19, presents a poignant scene between Odysseus and his wife, Penelope, where recognition is intentionally delayed. This scene mirrors an earlier one with Eumaios, Odysseus' loyal swineherd. Eumaios plays a connecting role, passing messages between the estranged couple, setting the stage for their eventual meeting. In both scenes, Odysseus interacts at length with someone close to him without revealing his true identity. Penelope showcases her unwavering loyalty, while Eumaios displays his dedication, even though Odysseus remains incognito. Interestingly, both encounters are preceded by confrontations. Eumaios' dogs threaten Odysseus, and Melantho, a disloyal maid, verbally attacks him. In both instances, the host intervenes, preventing any harm to Odysseus. The narrative draws parallels between these confrontations. While Eumaios' dogs are real, Melantho's aggressive behavior likens her to a dog, especially when Penelope refers to her as a bitch. This canine imagery is consistent, emphasizing the hostility Odysseus faces. Another striking similarity is how both Penelope and Eumaios, while speaking to Odysseus in disguise, think of him as he were absent and even allude to his presumed death. Clothing also plays a significant role in both scenes, highlighting the importance of appearances and disguises in the narrative. However, Odysseus faces challenges in both interactions. With Eumaios, he struggles to gain complete trust as the swineherd remains skeptical about Odysseus' return. Penelope, on the other hand, seeks concrete evidence that the stranger before her has truly encountered her husband. Despite these parallels, the emotional intensity varies. While Odysseus remains composed with Eumaios, his interaction with Penelope is charged with emotion. He struggles to hold back tears, reminiscent of his earlier encounter with his old dog, Argos. This difference underscores the deep bond between Odysseus and Penelope, setting the stage for their eventual reunion. In the Odyssey, Odysseus chooses not to reveal his identity to Penelope for various reasons. One significant factor is the portrayal of woman's fidelity, or lack thereof. In the narrative, the story suggests that women, even those considered moral, can be led astray by romantic or sexual encounters. This perspective is evident in the tale of a maidservant who betrays Eumaios after becoming involved with a Phoenician trader. The narrative comments on the power of, quote, lovely lovemaking, end quote, to divert even the most virtuous woman's thoughts, as seen in Odyssey 15. This theme of woman's fidelity is further explored through the characters of Clytemnestra and Helen. Both are repeatedly mentioned in the Odyssey and serve as potential contrasts or comparisons to Penelope. Each of these women represents varying levels of marital loyalty. Clytemnestra, she represents the most severe form of marital betrayal. Not only does she take a lover, but she also either assists in her husband's murder or fails to prevent it. Her actions epitomize the most extreme form of infidelity from a husband's viewpoint. Helen, her story offers a more nuanced perspective on fidelity. While she leaves her husband for another man, she eventually returns to him. This places her in a middle ground between absolute loyalty and complete betrayal. Penelope, she stands as the paragon of marital fidelity in the Odyssey. Despite being surrounded by suitors during Odysseus' absence, she remains unwaveringly loyal to her husband. Throughout the Odyssey, Penelope's character is explored in relation to these varying degrees of fidelity. The narrative toys with the idea that she could potentially fit into any of these categories, emphasizing the complexity of her character and the challenges she faces in maintaining her loyalty. The Odyssey often draws parallels between the fates of Agamemnon's family and that of Odysseus's. These parallels serve as cautionary tales and potential outcomes for the central characters of the poem. For instance, Odysseus and Agamemnon, just as Agamemnon was murdered upon his return home, there's a looming threat that Odysseus might meet a similar fate. Penelope and Clytemnestra. Clytemnestra's betrayal of her husband Agamemnon serves as a dark reflection of what Penelope might become. The narrative toys with the idea that Penelope could betray Odysseus in his absence. Telemachos and Orestes. Telemachos, like Orestes, might find himself in a position where he has to avenge his father's death. However, as the story progresses, especially after Odysseus' return, Penelope's character is liking more to Helen, particularly the version of Helen in Menelaus' recounting of the Trojan horse incident. In that tale, Helen, recognizing the warriors hidden inside the Trojan horse, circles it, mimicking the voices of their wives. This act of Helen's mirrors the Odyssey's underlying concern that Penelope, upon recognizing Odysseus, might unintentionally expose his disguise. In terms of jeopardizing Odysseus' identity, Penelope is seen as the least likely to do so, with Clytemnestra being the most probable, and Helen occupying a middle ground. Interestingly, the narrative does introduce a moment where a woman almost reveals Odysseus' identity, but this role is given to Eurycleia, the loyal nurse. Her recognition of Odysseus is intricately tied to Penelope's own realization of her husband's return. Towards the conclusion of a recognition scene, Penelope herself draws a comparison to Helen, highlighting the interconnected fates and choices of the women in the Odyssey. In the Odyssey, several characters, including the Phoenician servant, Clytemnestra, and Helen, have romantic encounters outside of wedlock. In contrast, Penelope remains loyal to her husband. However, the narrative cleverly plays with the idea of her potential infidelity, especially given the uncertainty of Odysseus' fate. While Penelope never opens showing interest in any of the suitors, the poem subtly touches upon the possibility. A notable instance is when Athena nudges Telemachos to depart from Sparta, hinting that Penelope might soon wed Eumaios. Quote, "Understand the nature of a woman's heart. She often seeks to build a new life with a new partner, forgetting her past children and the memories of her departed husband," end quote. Penelope seems more influenced by external pressures, especially from her family, rather than genuine desire. The narrative here primarily warns Telemachos about the risks to his inheritance if Penelope remarries. Both Eumaios and Penelope, characters with many similarities in the story, are depicted as steadfastly loyal. However, their loyalty is tested, making their eventual reunions all the more poignant. At its core, the structure of romantic tales dictates that Odysseus cannot reveal his true identity to Penelope too soon. In such narratives, the moment of recognition serves as a reward for the hero. It comes after the protagonist has not only endured hardships, but has also reclaimed his prosperity. This narrative structure ensures that Penelope's moment of realization about Odysseus' identity occurs near the epic's conclusion, specifically after Odysseus has defeated the suitors, since the suitors are primarily associated with the divine hospitality theme in the Odyssey. The recognition scenes involving characters linked to their downfall happen earlier in the story. When Penelope hears the stranger, Odysseus in disguise, speak of an encounter with her husband, she is moved to tears, sensing the truth in his words. This emotional response is beautifully captured in a 5-line simile. Odysseus, too, is moved to tears, but he hides his emotions. This moment mirrors an earlier scene with Argos, further emphasizing the theme of concealed recognition. While Penelope is deeply affected by the stranger's story, she seeks evidence, putting Odysseus to the test. This moment mirrors Athena's unique recognition scene in Book 13, where she, unlike Odysseus, fully understands the situation and knows who he is. I strongly disagree with some interpretations suggesting that Penelope recognizes her husband at this point. They also neglect the striking similarities this scene has with Eumaios' encounter in Book 14. To assume Penelope recognizes Odysseus here is to project a modern perspective onto the text, which goes against the grain of ancient myth and the romantic narrative structure. Why would the Odyssey lessen the anticipation of the pivotal scene in Book 23? Instead, the epic cleverly plays with its own established conventions of recognition. It blurs but doesn't erase the distinction between immediate and delayed recognitions. Penelope gets tantalizingly close to the truth, much like Eurycleia's emotional outburst. Her interaction with the disguised Odysseus is reminiscent of Athena's playful encounter in Book 13, but she doesn't possess the same level of insight as the goddess. Penelope's inquiry centers on the attire Odysseus had on during his supposed meeting with the stranger. This scene also draws parallels with Odysseus' conversation with Queen Arete of Scheria, where their initial rapport is built on a discussion about clothing. Even though Arete seems convinced by his story, she doesn't truly recognize him until much later. Mirroring Penelope's eventual realization in Book 23, this thematic link with Arete further supports the idea that Penelope doesn't truly recognize Odysseus during their initial meeting, but will do so in their subsequent encounter in Book 23. Odysseus effortlessly meets Penelope's challenge regarding his attire, recalling the brooch she once gifted him. Interestingly, his answer draws a parallel with Eumaios' backstory. He mentions how the brooch caught the attention of many women, reminiscent of the admiration the jewelry of Phoenician traders received in Eumaios' father's house. It's often overlooked by many that it's Odysseus' portrayal of the herald Eurybates, rather than the clothing details, that serves as the ultimate proof, moving Penelope to further tears. But why is this significant? In his depiction of Eurybates, Odysseus underscores a crucial aspect of his personal connections, as highlighted by scholars. Odysseus values a harmony of mind in his close relationships. This shared mindset between Odysseus and Athena is what endears him to the goddess and explains her unwavering support. Furthermore, Odysseus' remarks about Eurybates not only draw a parallel with his bond with Athena, but also shed light on the essence of the recognition scenes in the narrative. True recognition, it seems, is achieved when two characters attain a mutual understanding, or a harmony of mind. Eurycleia's delayed recognition. Eurycleia's moment of recognizing Odysseus is intricately woven into the tapestry of the Odyssey. It complements Telemachos' own realization and is interlaced with Penelope's initial encounter with Odysseus. Just as Telemachos' early recognition contrasts with Eumaios' delayed recognition, Eurycleia's scene mirrors Penelope's postponed acknowledgement. The Odyssey foreshadows Eurycleia's connection with Telemachos early on. Telemachos entrusts her with the secret of his journey to see Nestor and Menelaus, making her swear not to inform Penelope. This dynamic sets the stage for later scenes. Penelope remains unaware of Telemachos' travels, hinting at her delayed recognition, while Eurycleia is consistently in the know. Eurycleia's recognition, much like Eumaios, is rooted in the customs of hospitality. She offers to wash Odysseus' feet, a gesture deeply embedded in ancient hospitality traditions. However, her act of washing and the subsequent recognition are postponed by a series of unique narrative techniques. Among these is her heartfelt address to her seemingly absent master, masterfully blurring the lines of Odysseus' role in the story. As she discovers the scar on his thigh, the narrative pauses to delve into the backstory of how Odysseus acquired it. This exceptional narrative shift, reminiscent of the stream of consciousness style popularized in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, allows readers to immerse themselves in Eurycleia's thoughts, experiencing the rush of memories associated with the scar. At a certain juncture, the recognition scenes of Eurycleia and Penelope seem to intertwine, much like the near merging of Telemachos and Eumaios, their recognitions in Book 16. In a moment of overwhelming emotion, Eurycleia exclaims Odysseus' true identity. The very revelation Odysseus feared might come from Penelope. This could have prematurely unveiled his identity to Penelope, but Athena intervenes just in time. Interestingly, the Odyssey doesn't use a hypothetical scenario to illustrate Athena's timely action, a narrative choice that might seem unusual. Athena's intervention is reminiscent of another scene where she guides Helen away from the Trojan horse, after Odysseus silences Anticlos. In this instance, Athena ensures Penelope remains oblivious to Eurycleia's outburst. while Odysseus swiftly silences his servant. Pledging her allegiance, Eurycleia recalls the oath she took for Telemachos. Her remark, "My child, what sort of word has escaped the barrier of your teeth?" drips with irony given her own slip of the tongue. The narrative then gracefully transitions back to Penelope's prolonged recognition scene, referring to him as guest. Penelope continues their deep conversation, echoing the exchanges between Odysseus and Eumaios in books 14 and 15. A profound connection forms, similar to the bond between Eumaios and Odysseus. Penelope even shares a personal dream with him. She finds their discussion so captivating that she mentions she could converse all night long with him, mirroring Eumaios' sentiments. Eumaios and Philodeus recognition scenes. Among the recognition scenes in the Odyssey, the episode involving Eumaios and Philodeus is relatively straightforward. This scene, along with those of Telemachos and Athena, is directly tied to the impending confrontation with the suitors. After securing a vow of loyalty from both men, Odysseus unveils his true identity. However, unlike the dramatic visual transformation Athena bestows upon him before his reunion with Telemachos, here Odysseus relies on showing his distinctive scar as proof, drawing a parallel to Eurycleia's recognition scene. Following this revelation, and in a manner reminiscent of his interaction with Eurycleia, Odysseus provides the men with a set of instructions. This moment of shared emotion and guidance is punctuated by a series of hypothetical scenarios. These scenarios serve as narrative links connecting the recognition scenes of Telemachos, Eumaios, and Philodeus, and ultimately Penelope. Penelope's recognition scene. Penelope's and Laertes' moments of recognizing Odysseus stand out from the rest, as they occur after the suitors have been defeated. These scenes epitomize the culmination of a romantic narrative. While other recognition scenes in the Odyssey can be viewed as a blend of romance with elements of divine hospitality narratives, Penelope's recognition scene is particularly reminiscent of Athena's in Book 13. In a twist, Penelope tests Odysseus, reversing the typical roles seen in such narratives. This is somewhat echoed in Eumaios' unexpected skepticism towards Odysseus' intentions. When Eurycleia excitedly rushes to inform a skeptical Penelope of Odysseus' return, Penelope's hesitance becomes the central theme of the scene. This reluctance builds upon a motif introduced earlier with Telemachos. Eurycleia urges Penelope to see for herself that Odysseus has indeed returned, drawing a parallel to the biblical story of Joseph. She also references the scar, tying this scene back to her own earlier recognition. However, Penelope's dismissal of this visual proof indicates that her test for Odysseus will demand a unique form of verification. In the aftermath of this fierce confrontation with the suitors, Odysseus' blood-streaked appearance acts as a barrier to immediate recognition based on looks alone. This grisly state aligns perfectly with Athena's prior expectations of how her favored hero would deal with the suitors. Eurycleia, assuming Penelope would want to witness this moment of victory, describes Odysseus as resembling a lion, drenched in blood and gore. This imagery echoes Athena's earlier anticipation, envisioning your vast hall splattered with the blood and brains of the suitors. Such graphic depictions of violence are reminiscent of the imagery associated with the goddess Anat. Some scholars, like Bruce Loudon, have suggested that traditions surrounding Anat might have influenced the portrayal of the Homeric Athena. In this unique recognition scene, it's Penelope who takes on the role of the tester, much like Athena does in Book 13. Telemachos, in his criticism of Penelope's distant demeanor, inadvertently critiques her assumption of this testing role, while Odysseus understands and accepts her need to test him. He mistakenly believes her reservations stem from his disheveled appearance. After being bathed, dressed, and groomed by Eurycleia, he sits across from Penelope. Despite his efforts, her reservations persist. It's Odysseus who broaches the subject of their shared bed, suggesting Eurycleia prepare one for him. Seizing on this, Penelope crafts her test around the intricately designed bed he built, a test explicitly acknowledged by the narrator. known for his composure, as emphasized by Athena. Odysseus, perhaps frustrated by Penelope's challenge, passionately recounts the story of their bed. Beyond serving as a symbol of recognition, the bed carries deeper connotations, including erotic undertones. The Odyssey's narrative spread across 3 islands, showcasing Odysseus navigating relationships with dominant females. With Circe, their intimate relationship becomes a pathway to understanding and trust. On Sharia, Odysseus' interactions with Arete mirror his current negotiations with Penelope. The erotic element given Arete's marital status is instead channeled through her daughter, Nausicaa. Ayaya, their shared bed, symbolizes their mutual understanding. After their intimate encounter, Circe's threat diminishes, and she restores his crew. Back on Ithaca, Penelope's use of their marital bed as a token of recognition mirrors Circe's reconciliation with Odysseus. On Ayaya, Odysseus ensures Circe swears an oath before their intimate moment. Similarly, in this reversed recognition scene, Penelope ensures Odysseus verifies his identity before they reunite. The bed's connection to love and intimacy is emphasized by its descriptor. The bed, made from a tree, is symbolic of life and vitality. This olive tree, untouched by the suitors and beyond their influence, represents the essence of Ithaca that remains unscathed and vibrant. This tree, which verifies Odysseus' identity, is also linked to Athena, emphasizing the deep connection between her and Odysseus. The bed showcases Odysseus' craftsmanship, highlighting his ability to create from trees. For instance, to defeat Troy, he came up with the idea of the wooden Trojan horse. He used an olive beam to blind the Cyclops, Polyphemus, and crafted his own raft to depart from Calypso. In the Iliad, during his wrestling match with Aias, their intertwined arms are likened to crossbeams, expertly joined by a skilled carpenter. Odysseus' pinnacle demonstration of his woodworking prowess in the Homeric epics is the crafting of Penelope's marital bed. The Odyssey strategically delays mentioning this bed and its special construction until this pivotal moment, using it as a climatic point of recognition. As Odysseus emerges from his bath, a simile likens his head and shoulders to the masterpiece of a talented artisan blessed by Hephaestus or Athena. Penelope underscores that it was Odysseus himself who crafted the bed. This detailed description of the bed includes elements reminiscent of when he constructed the raft. Adding a touch of elegance, he adorned the bed with gold, silver, and ivory, echoing the earlier simile that compared him to a craftsman creation, seamlessly weaving Odysseus' artistry into the narrative. This recognition scene, while unique in its use of the bed as evidence, contains elements seen in other episodes. Before descending the stairs, Penelope voices her belief to Eurycleia that Odysseus must have perished far from home, a sentiment shared by Eumaios and Penelope herself in a previous scene. Eurycleia's mention of the scar as proof suggests a self-aware, almost theatrical use of recognition symbols in this episode. Emotion runs deep throughout, with tears and sobbing taking center stage, mirroring other recognition scenes. Their embrace parallels Odysseus' affectionate gesture towards Ithaca during his acknowledgement by Athena. This scene is the last of 3 crucial moments, as Dawn's pink fingers would have risen during their lament. Athena, the gray-eyed deity, had other plans in mind. Yet the most profound emotional moment is when Penelope truly sees him. She's overwhelmed, her heart and knees giving way, foreshadowing the intensity of the upcoming scene with Laertes. Laertes' delayed recognition. The Odyssey's final recognition scene between Odysseus and his father, Laertes, has faced criticism, particularly for Odysseus' perceived cruelty. However, this scene is not only rooted in tradition, but also aligns traditionally with the sequence of recognition scenes, as seen when compared to the myth of Joseph. The behavior that draws the most criticism, where Odysseus chooses to taunt his father with derisive words, mirrors Joseph's interaction with his brothers during their moment of recognition. This scene with Laertes shares structural similarities with Penelope's recognition in Book 23. Both scenes unfold after the demise of the suitors. In describing how he crafted the bed, Odysseus speaks of clearing the olive tree's foliage and branches and shaping its trunk. When he encounters Laertes, his father is engrossed in gardening, tending to a plant with a spade. The act of Odysseus shaping the trunk in Penelope's scene foreshadows Laertes' gardening when they meet, drawing a thematic connection between father and son, both engrossed in nurturing plants. Both moments underscore the bond with nature, the orchards symbolizing the father-son relationship, and the olive tree representing the marital bond. In the tale Odysseus weaves for Laertes, he asserts a bond with Odysseus through shared hospitality. This ties back to Penelope's initial recognition scene. Drawing on this supposed link between the stranger and Odysseus, Laertes addresses Odysseus as Xenos, much like Penelope does in various instances. Other elements are more universally present across multiple recognition scenes in the Odyssey. Laertes believes Odysseus to be deceased, evoking a sorrow similar to Priam's for his believed to be lost son, expressing his grief through tears. In the tale he spins for Laertes, Odysseus employs a phrase deeply embedded in the Odyssey structure, acting almost as a recognition token. While providing a fabricated name, origin, and lineage, Odysseus conveys to Laertes that he arrived there unintentionally, but a god drove me away from Sicania, so I arrived here against my wishes. The verb drove, used by Odysseus, is distinctively utilized in the Odyssey. It typically appears at the start of a line, often refers to Odysseus, generally depicts divine intervention or wrath, and encapsulates Odysseus's challenges in returning home. Even within this fabricated story, the verb serves as a condensed reflection of Odysseus's decade-long journey. This usage acts as a subtle recognition token, signaling his true identity more to the readers than to Laertes. The incorporation of this verb underscores that the scene with Laertes is an integral, traditional component of the Odyssey, masterfully weaving in central themes and dynamics of the epic. When Odysseus repeatedly asserts that he has met and hosted Odysseus, Laertes is overcome with grief, symbolically pouring dirt over his face. This portrayal aligns Laertes with iconic figures of sorrow, like Priam from the Iliad and Job from the Bible. Each exhibits profound gestures of grief. Priam covers himself in dung, while Job rips his garments and shaves his head. Laertes' reaction also mirrors Penelope's in invoking a potent emotional response from Odysseus. This intense emotional momentary disrupts Odysseus' control over the situation, evident when he feels a sharp pain in his nostrils. Similar to his interaction with Penelope, this emotional surge propels Odysseus to reveal his true identity, announcing to Laertes that he is the very man in question. However, unlike Penelope, who deliberately pushes Odysseus towards this revelation, Laertes remains oblivious to his role in the disclosure. Upon this revelation, Laertes seeks evidence. Odysseus offers his scar as proof, reminiscent of Euryclea's recognition, and then recalls the day Laertes named and enumerated all the trees for him. The recurring themes of wood, carpentry, and trees seamlessly connect the recognition scenes of Laertes and Penelope. As Odysseus anticipates the potential fallout from his actions against the suitors, he quickly tries to curb the emotional outpouring. Sparked by their reunion, this response aligns with the traditional reactions observed throughout the Odyssey's recognition scenes. In his reunions with Telemachos, Philodius, and Eumaios, and the subsequent scene with Penelope, there's a looming threat of uncontrollable grief that could potentially last until daybreak. In each instance, someone intervenes to prevent this overwhelming sorrow. Telemachos in Book 16, Odysseus in Book 21, and Athena in Book 23. They each use pivotal counterfactuals to redirect the emotional trajectory. The scene with Laertes culminates in another intense emotional display. Once Laertes is fully convinced of Odysseus' identity, he embraces his son, becoming so overwhelmed that he nearly collapses. The myth of Joseph, much like the Odyssey and other romantic tales, reaches its zenith through a series of emotionally charged recognition scenes. Remarkably, Almost every element in these scenes finds a parallel. In the Odyssey, the recognition scenes unfold against the backdrop of the suitors exploiting Odysseus' household. Similarly, in Joseph's story, the backdrop is the severe drought and famine. These oppressive situations interact in the Odyssey when the suitors are frequently depicted as consuming Telemachos' resources, similar to how Joseph and his family are running out of resources. Looking at the broader typology of recognition scenes in the romantic tales, Joseph's story mirrors the general type seen in the Odyssey. The protagonist, despite recognizing his kin, hides his identity. The relatives, on the other hand, remain oblivious to his true identity until they undergo various tests of loyalty or morality. This fundamental narrative structure aligns the Odyssey and Joseph's myth, distinguishing them from many other ancient romances, including the works like Euripides' Ion, Helen, Iphigenia in Taurus, the Greek novels, Kalidasa's Shakuntala, the Apollonius romance, and even later works like Shakespeare's romances. This structure introduces motifs like the protagonist struggling to hide his tears, a theme both Genesis and the Odyssey extensively explore. In terms of the Odyssey's three subtypes of recognition scenes, Joseph's story aligns with the specific form of the postponed recognition, akin to the scenes with Eumaios and Penelope in the Odyssey. This is evident in his initial interactions with his brothers. When Joseph's brothers arrived, they prostrated themselves before him. Upon seeing them, Joseph recognized them. However, he feigned ignorance and addressed them with sternness. While Joseph knew them instantly, his brothers remained unaware of his true identity. Genesis delves deeper into the concept of postponed recognition than the Odyssey does. Joseph's tactics of deception and testing surpass those of Odysseus. He keeps his brothers in suspense for a more extended period, subjecting them to heightened distress. While Odysseus crafts fictitious tales about himself, Joseph levels false allegations against his brothers, branding them as spies. He further intensifies their ordeal by imprisoning them for 3 days. While releasing the majority, he detains Simeon for an intermediate duration. After their grain purchases with silver, Joseph ensures their silver is secretly returned to their sacks. The discovery of this silver instills fear of being labeled as thieves. My money has been returned. It's right here in my sack. Confused and fearful, they pondered what God has done to us. We've been brought here because of the silver incident. He aims to accuse us, punish us, confiscate our donkeys, and enslave us. In a repeated ruse, Joseph instructs his steward to hide his silver cup in Benjamin's sack. The anguish and distress he inflicts on his brothers surpasses any emotional turmoil Odysseus causes Penelope or Laertes. Joseph's deceptions are more intricate and deceptive than any of Odysseus's actions in the Odyssey. There's an intriguing double standard in cultural interpretations. Odysseus often faces criticism for his actions, while Joseph's more extreme behaviors are seldom highlighted or critiqued. These parallels hint that the actions of both Odysseus and Joseph are not only anticipated, but also accepted within the framework of ancient romance. The reunion of Joseph and his brothers unfolds within the context of a hospitality scene, mirroring many recognition scenes in the Odyssey. Observing his brothers' compliance and bringing Benjamin as instructed, Joseph commands a feast to be prepared. The steward offers them water to cleanse their feet, a gesture not only emblematic of hospitality in ancient narratives, but also crucial in Odysseus's recognition scene with Eurycleia, as she washed his feet, just like the woman washed Jesus' feet in the Gospels. Similar to the Odyssey, where Odysseus's kin and servants ponder about him while he's in their midst, Joseph's brothers reflect on him, even as they stand before him, oblivious to his true identity. In both tales, the protagonists' families presume them to be deceased. For Joseph, various instances in the Odyssey for Odysseus. Various places in Genesis for Joseph, various instances in the Odyssey for Odysseus. Both Joseph and Odysseus grapple with their emotions during these recognition scenes, striving to mask their tears, just as Odysseus must hide his emotional response upon seeing Argos and later with Penelope. Joseph too battles to conceal his tears when confronting his brothers after 2 decades of separation. Joseph's decision to disclose his identity comes after a series of tests that his brothers, especially Judah, must pass. This mirrors not only Odysseus' general approach, but also the challenges Penelope sets for him. With Joseph believed to be dead, Benjamin, his only other sibling by the same mother, becomes the apple of Jacob's eye. By forcing them to present Jacob and then planting his silver cup in Benjamin's sack, Joseph sets a trap. He offers his brothers a chance to betray Benjamin as they did him. As a scholar Spicer aptly puts it, the brothers have transformed. They've successfully navigated the ultimate test, giving Joseph the clarity he sought. With his brothers proving their loyalty, Joseph unveils his true identity. The brothers' stunned reaction upon this revelation is reminiscent of Telemachos' shock when he sees Odysseus in his true form. They were so taken aback to see Joseph that they were rendered speechless. His son Telemachos was taken aback and, fearing he might be a deity, averted his gaze. Drawing a parallel with Telemachos' response to Odysseus, as highlighted by many scholars, the brothers implicitly equate Joseph with a divine being. Joseph's subsequent words to them echo Odysseus' reassurance to Laertes when faced with disbelief. "I am the one you inquired about. I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt." In both the Odyssey and the story of Joseph, the climactic recognition scenes involve the protagonists' returns or reunions with their fathers. These elderly fathers are depicted in strikingly similar ways. As grief-stricken old men deeply mourning their presumed lost sons, the main characters of the narratives. Joseph, as part of his elaborate test for his brothers, repeatedly subjects Jacob to profound distress by demanding that Benjamin be brought to him. "You have deprived me of my children. Joseph is gone. Simeon is gone. And now you want to take Benjamin? Everything is against me." But Jacob protested. "I cannot let my son go with you. His brother is dead, and he is the only one left. If anything were to happen to him on his journey, you would bring my old age down to the grave in sorrow. If you were to take this one from me too, and something were to happen to him, you would send this old man to his grave in utter misery." In both tales, the anguish the protagonists inflict upon their fathers appears excessive, if not unwarranted. For Laertes, some argue that since the suitors are already defeated, there's no justification for further deceit. Similarly, in Joseph's story, his chosen method of testing his brothers seems to inflict more pain on his father than on the brothers themselves. Both the Odyssey and Joseph's story depict the overwhelming emotions experienced by the fathers during the climactic moment of recognition. These emotions are so intense that both narratives subtly suggest the possibility of the father's death upon recognizing their sons. In the Odyssey, Laertes is deeply affected by the revelation. He is moved to tears, rebukes himself in his grief, and eventually faints from the emotional weight. Joseph's reunion with Jacob employs a motif reminiscent of the scene between Odysseus and Argos. Argos, having waited long enough to recognize Odysseus, passes away immediately after the recognition. Similarly, upon recognizing Joseph, Jacob expresses a sentiment that mirrors this motif, declaring, "Now that I have seen you are still alive, I am ready to die." This emotional intensity is further emphasized in the Odyssey when Eumaios and Philodius are integrated into Odysseus' family. Odysseus promises them, "I will ensure you both have wives, grant you property and homes built close to mine. In my eyes, you will be akin to brothers and companions to Telemachos." Considering Eumaios' backstory of being sold into slavery and his postponed recognition, his inclusion into Odysseus' family mirrors Jacob's assimilation into Joseph's new Egyptian family. This parallel underscores a profound connection between the Odyssey and Joseph's tale. Joseph's actions throughout his recognition scenes mirror Athena's portrayal of Odysseus' approach to testing his kin. If we adjust the reference from Penelope to Joseph's father and brothers, the parallels become evident. The disparity between the audience's knowledge of Penelope's loyalty and Odysseus' inclination to test her, even if it causes her pain, mirrors Joseph's treatment of both Jacob and his siblings. The dynamics in Odysseus's conversation with Penelope in Book 19 closely resemble Joseph's initial interaction with his brothers in Egypt, particularly in terms of causing emotional distress and employing deception. Both myths exhibit innovation in their placement and execution of recognition scenes. The Odyssey structures its recognition scenes around its theme of negative theoxany, divine hospitality. Except for the scenes with Laertes in the latter part of Penelope's recognition, all recognition scenes in the Odyssey occur before Odysseus confronts the suitors. These scenes serve to rally allies for the impending confrontation. On the other hand, Joseph's recognition scenes present a unique twist. Instead of the protagonist returning home, his family comes to him. This deviation from the traditional romance narrative serves Genesis's broader objective of explaining the Israelites' initial settlement in Egypt. In the Odyssey, Odysseus has distinct recognition scenes with various family members. In contrast, in Joseph's story, these separate recognitions are manifested as individual arrivals of his brothers and the father in Egypt. Dreams in the Odyssey and Joseph's myth. Dreams as a motif are prevalent in romance narratives, from ancient tales like the Iphigenia in Taurus to Shakespearean plays like Cymbeline. These dreams often serve as divine messages or omens. Both Greek and Old Testament myths regard dreams as manifestations of divine intent. Gods frequently communicate with mortals through dreams, or dispatch dreams to specific individuals. Given that dreams are perceived as divine signals, an individual capable of interpreting them is often equated with a prophet in both mythological traditions. This association between prophecy and dream interpretation is evident in the Homeric epics, as illustrated by Achilles' words in the Iliad. Let's seek insights from a prophet, priest, or even a dream interpreter, for dreams too are from Zeus. The Odyssey frequently incorporates dreams. However, dreams hold even more significance in Joseph's story. As Spicer notes, dreams in Joseph's narrative act as divine guideposts to the future. But what sets the Odyssey and Joseph's myth apart from other tales is the central role dreams play. In both stories, the protagonist, be it Odysseus or Joseph, is tasked with interpreting dreams. Joseph's ability to decipher dreams is a recurring theme. Yet in line with the Old Testament's narrative style, Joseph perceives himself as merely an instrument, emphasizing that the true source of interpretation is God. All interpretation belongs to God. It's not me, but God, who will provide Pharaoh with a reassuring answer. In Joseph's most pivotal dream interpretation, he foresees and subsequently helps Egypt navigate a 7-year drought. In the Odyssey, Odysseus's prowess in interpreting dreams is revealed late in the narrative, specifically during the night preceding the suitor's downfall. In the context of Penelope's delayed recognition, Penelope shares a dream with the incognito Odysseus, where an eagle kills 20 geese, and she's left distraught. The eagle, before departing, proclaims that the dream's events will come to fruition and identifies itself as Odysseus. However, Penelope remains skeptical about the dream's prophetic nature. Given the mythological association between dream interpretation and prophecy, Odysseus's interpretation of the dream, which foretells the suitor's demise, aligns him with the prophetic figure of Theoclymenus. The latter's prophecies, however, are presented in a more cataclysmic manner. Drawing a parallel with Joseph's myth, the suitors' exploitation of Ithaca, depicted as them feasting on Odysseus's wealth and likened to a parasitic ticks, mirrors the devastating effects of the severe drought in Egypt. Thus, just as Joseph's dream interpretations help mitigate the drought's impact on Egypt, Odysseus's ability to decipher the dream signals the impending end of the suitor's tyranny. Odysseus and Joseph, the trickster lineage of Antilochus and Jacob. Odysseus from Homer's Odyssey and Joseph from the Bible have more in common than just being central figures in their respective tales. Both are linked through their family histories and are associated with a particular type of myth, the sacking of a city. Odysseus is the grandson of Antilochus, who was renowned for his unmatched skills in theft and making deceptive promises. This talent was a gift from the god Hermes. There's a reference in the Iliad where Odysseus wears a helmet that Antilochus had stolen. The Iliad also provides insight into what's being skilled in making oaths entails. In the story within the Iliad, the god Zeus declares declares that his soon-to-be-born descendant will be a ruler. However, the goddess Hera manipulates the situation, ensuring that Eurystheus, also a descendant of Zeus, but not the one intended by Zeus, becomes the ruler instead. She cleverly uses Zeus's vaguely worded oath against him, much like how a trickster would exploit ambiguities. Antilochus, with his knack for using words to his advantage, might have operated in a similar way. When he named his grandson Odysseus, it was a nod to the anger and strong reactions his own cunning ways often evoked in others. The name Odysseus is derived from the word adousimenos, which means to incite wrath. In essence, Odysseus carries the legacy of his grandfather's ability to provoke strong emotions in others. Jacob, Joseph's father, is renowned in biblical lore as a master of deception. His cunning is reminiscent of certain myths from other cultures. One such tale involves Jacob's manipulation to secure his brother Esau's birthright. When Isaac, their father, decides to bless Esau, Rebekah, their mother, intervenes. Preferring Jacob, she devises a plan to deceive her blind husband. She prepares a meal, mimicking the one Isaac had requested from Esau. To further the ruse, she dresses Jacob in Esau's clothes and covers him with animal skins, ensuring that if Jacob were to touch him, he'd be convinced he was touching the hairy Esau. When Jacob serves the meal and claims to be Esau, Isaac is deceived by the scent of Esau's clothes and the feel of the animal skins. Consequently, he blesses Jacob instead of Esau. This biblical episode has striking similarities with the myth of Hera's deception of Zeus. In both tales, a wife deceives her husband to prevent him from favoring a particular son. Esau, described as a hunter with rough, hairy skin and his father's favorite, can be likened to Heracles from the Iliad. Both stories emphasize the irreversible nature of a blessing or oath once given. While Isaac is a more vulnerable figure compared to the mighty Zeus, the essence of the deception remains consistent. The parallels extend further. Both Jacob and Eurystheus from the Iliad benefit from the deceptive acts, gaining power and status they arguably didn't earn. The term dolos, for trick or deceit in the Septuagint, referring to Jacob's deception, mirrors the term dolophrosyne, which means craft or craftiness or deceitfulness, used for Hera's cunning in the Iliad. Another similar tale is found in the Metamorphosis, where Semele wishes to see Zeus in his true form, with Hera manipulating the situation. In these narratives, figures like Jacob, Hera, and Antilochus exploit others by manipulating oaths to their advantage. Jacob's actions, especially towards his family, underscore a recurring theme of familial deception in his story. While Homer's Odyssey doesn't directly show Antilochus in act of theft, the other stories outside of the Odyssey frequently link him with stealing livestock. One such tale recounts how Antilochus cunningly took mares from Eurystheus. It's said that after stealing them, Antilochus handed the mares over to the hero Heracles. However, when the time came, Heracles declined to return them. Further accounts about Antilochus describe him as a master thief, specializing in stealing horses, cattle, and sheep. His signature trick was altering the animals' brands, making it difficult for their rightful owners to identify them. This trait is subtly echoed in the Odyssey when a young Odysseus is tasked with retrieving sheep that were stolen from Ithaca by men from Messene. This narrative aligns with the story of Antilochus' theft of Eurystheus' mares. During his mission in Messene, Odysseus encounters Eurystheus' son, Iphitos. Iphitos is on a quest of his own, trying to find the mares his father lost to Antilochus. Their meeting proves fruitful for Odysseus as Iphitos gifts him a bow. This very bow later plays a pivotal role when Odysseus uses it to defeat the suitors. However, Iphitos' journey doesn't end as favorably. After his kind gesture to Odysseus, Iphitos meets a tragic fate when he confronts Heracles in an attempt to retrieve the stolen mares. Antilochus, even outside of the Odyssey, is renowned for his unique ability to deceive. As early accounts like Ahoy suggest, he possessed the skill to render things invisible, change their color, or modify their markings. This talent allowed him to steal numerous herds and flocks from others. In other tales, like those of Pherecydes, Ovid, and Aeginos, Antilochus could transform animals into different shapes, changing their colors or even add or remove horns. A scholar named Grants, classicist Timothy Grants, provides further insight, referencing various sources and even artwork. He mentions that Antilochus, despite his cunning, was once caught by Sisyphus. Sisyphus, to counteract Antilochus's thievery, began marking his animals as hoofs with a unique monogram. A 2nd century Megarian bowl even depicts scenes where Antilochus seems to be stealing cattle from a protesting Sisyphus. The Homeric hymn to Hermes offers a glimpse into the possible tactics Antilochus might have employed. At birth, Hermes is labeled both a thief and a cattle herder. In cunning act, Hermes separates 50 of Apollo's cattle, making them walk backwards to mislead anyone following their tracks. He further disguises his theft by creating sandals from brushwood and twigs, ensuring his footprints remain hidden. After stealing the cattle, Hermes uses innovative methods like starting fires by rubbing twigs to further his deception. Even when confronted, Hermes' cunning doesn't wane. Apollo, attempting to bind Hermes, finds that the bonds magically grow around and hide the stolen cattle. The tale concludes with a reconciliation between Apollo and Hermes, with Hermes gifting Apollo a lyre in exchange for the cattle. This exchange cements Hermes' reputation not just as a thief, but also as a protector and benefactor of livestock. Jacob, much like Antilochus, is associated with cunning strategies related to livestock, even if he isn't directly shown stealing. Laban, his father-in-law, and Laban's sons perceive Jacob as a thief, which is reminiscent of how Antilochus was viewed in other tales. The methods Jacob employs to amass livestock from Laban have parallels with the descriptions of Antilochus and the tactics detailed in Homeric hymn to Hermes. For instance, Antilochus' ability to change the appearance of livestock, as described by Gantz, mirrors Jacob's actions with Laban's animals. Antilochus could transform the young of herds into any shape he desired, and even alter their colors from black to white, and vice versa. In the Genesis account, Jacob's care leads to the prosperity of Laban's flocks, drawing a parallel with Hermes, who is seen as a protector of pastors. When Jacob seeks his due wages from Laban, he requests newborn lambs and goats with specific markings and colors. Any animal found in his possession without these characteristics would be considered stolen, further linking Jacob with the theme of livestock theft. However, Laban, perhaps sensing Jacob's intentions, quickly segregates the livestock with the desired markings to prevent Jacob from breeding them. Undeterred, Jacob employs a clever tactic. He places freshly cut rods from poplar, almond, and plane trees near the mating animals. This results in the birth of offspring with the desired markings. By selectively breeding the stronger goats, Jacob ensures that he acquired the most robust offspring. Finally, without informing Laban, Jacob departs with his now sizable collection of livestock. This secretive exit further cements the comparison between Jacob and figures like Antilochus and Hermes, who were known for their cunning and resourcefulness. Jacob, Hermes, and Antilochus are all characters from different myths, yet they share striking similarities. Each one uses what might be termed as magic to acquire livestock, altering their appearance and color. A recurring motif in these tales is the use of cut branches, which play a pivotal role in the magical and deceptive transfer of livestock. For instance, livestock is transferred from Apollo to Hermes, from Laban to Jacob, and from Eurystheus, Sisyphus, to Antilochus, using these methods. Jacob's story, in particular, embeds his cunning acquisition of livestock within a broader narrative of conflict between him and his brother Esau. This mirrors the Homeric hymn to Hermes, where Hermes' theft of Apollo's cattle is set against a backdrop of a disagreement between the two godly siblings. Another shared trait amongst these figures is their prowess in wrestling. Apollodorus mentions that Antilochus taught the hero Heracles to wrestle, a skill that Odysseus also possesses, as depicted in the Iliad and the Odyssey. Jacob's narrative showcases his wrestling abilities on two occasions. First, even before born, Jacob is described as grasping his twin brother Esau's heel. Later, in a more profound episode, Jacob wrestles with a divine being. Interestingly, Antilochus' sole dialogue in Homer's works involves naming Odysseus, which parallels a blessing scene. This is reminiscent of Jacob's interaction with Isaac, though the roles are reversed. Instead of receiving a blessing, the trickster figure, like Jacob, is the one bestowing it. These characters, with their trickster lineage, possess a unique blend of deceptive skills and verbal dexterity. The physical manifestation of these traits is wrestling. It's these very qualities that empower both Odysseus and Joseph to masterfully handle the delayed recognition scenes they orchestrate with their kin. Joseph in Genesis 34 and Odysseus in the Trojan War. Before their main adventures begin, both Joseph and Odysseus play roles in the conquest of cities, while the Trojan War is on a grander scale compared to the events at Shechem in Genesis 34. The core themes are strikingly similar. The story of Dinah's violation and the subsequent takeover of Hamor's city by Jacob's sons mirrors the central events of the Trojan War. Shechem, a Hivite, is captivated by Jacob's daughter, Dinah. He wrongs her, but then wishes to marry her. To discuss this marriage, Shechem's father, Hamor, meets with Jacob. However, Jacob's sons are furious about what happened to Dinah. Hamor suggests a union between the two communities, allowing intermarriages. Wanting to right his wrong, Shechem offers a generous dowry. Jacob's sons cunningly demand that all the men of Shechem city undergo circumcision. Shechem and Hamor agree, convincing every man in their city to follow suit. But as these men recover from the procedure, two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, ambush the city, killing all the men and rescuing Dinah. The rest of Jacob's sons, including Joseph, then loot the city. The Shechem story draws many parallels with key themes and figures from the Trojan War. Shechem and Paris both have a strong desire for sensual pleasures, but Shechem seems more accountable for his actions. He goes beyond Paris's attempts at reconciliation in the Iliad, where Paris only proposes to return the items he took from Menelaus's home. The fathers of these two characters, Hamor for Shechem and Priam for Paris, share striking resemblances. Hamor's generous nature, noble spirit, and courteous behavior mirror the best attributes of Priam. However, just as the Trojans were deceived by the Trojan horse, Hamor too is overly trusting, thinking everything is in order. Dinah's brothers, Simeon and Levi, mirror the actions of the Greek siblings Agamemnon and Menelaus, especially in their response to perceived wrongs. Just as Menelaus contemplates showing mercy to the Trojan Adrestus, Agamemnon convinces him otherwise, emphasizing that no Trojan should be spared. In your home, did the Trojans treat you kindly? Let's ensure none of them escape our wrath. Not even an unborn child. Every Trojan should face total annihilation. Similarly, Nestor reminds the Greek soldiers of the reason for their quest: Helen's abduction. Let no one think of home until he has avenged Helen's sorrow by being with a Trojan's wife. Jacob's sons echo these intense feelings when they question the dishonor done to their sister. Should our sister be treated as if she were nothing? Their strategy of deceiving the Hivites by having them circumcised, thereby weakening them, can be likened to the Greeks' cunning use of the Trojan horse to infiltrate Troy. While the Greeks relied on the elements of surprise, Jacob's sons had the added advantage of their enemies being already weakened. Dinah's allure can be compared, albeit on a smaller scale, to Helen's. However, unlike the detailed depiction of Helen in the Homeric epics, the stories don't delve into Dinah's personal feelings. One of the most notable contrasts in Shechem's story is the portrayal of Jacob's son. They are depicted unfavorably, emphasizing their deceit and treachery. This perspective is reminiscent of Euripides' style, where events are shown through a more grounded, less heroic lens. Shechem, in contrast to Paris, appears more reasonable. His willingness to be circumcised evokes more empathy than the actions of Jacob's sons. This mirrors the Iliad's approach of highlighting the compassionate aspects of the Trojans like Andromache, Hector, and Priam, while showcasing the cold-heartedness of some Greeks. Although Joseph's specific role isn't detailed, he is among Jacob's sons, involved in the city's looting. Jacob, now an older man seeking peace, disapproves of his son's actions, realizing it will tarnish their reputation in the region. While Genesis doesn't elaborate on Joseph's involvement, contrasting it with the Trojan War, where Odysseus is a key player, the parallel is still evident. Both Odysseus and Joseph's overarching stories share similar narrative arcs, They both inherit trickster qualities, participate in city conquests, and eventually become central figures in romantic tales. After the city's plunder, Joseph's romantic narrative unfolds, swiftly mirroring Odysseus's journey. The connection between the Joseph story, Aesop's life, and ancient narratives. The life story of Aesop, often referred to as the Aesop romance or Vita Aesopi, is a cornerstone when exploring the roots of Greek and Latin novels. This tale about Aesop, a renowned cultural icon, storyteller, and wise figure, was familiar to both medieval and modern European society. The manuscripts we know of today, as studied by B.E. Perry, trace back to the 2nd or 3rd century CE. However, Perry suggests that the original versions of these texts might date back to between the 1st century BCE and the 2nd century CE. He believes that the earliest known biography of Aesop might have evolved from writings as old as the 5th century BCE. Scholars have theorized that tales about Aesop and the 7 sages were popular in Greece around that time, marking the inception of Greek biographies. Some even hypothesize that a Greek Aesop story, similar to the Oriental tale of Ahikar, might have been crafted in the 6th century BCE. It's widely recognized that the heart of the Aesop romance, especially the sections set in Babylonia and Egypt, mirrors the famous Near Eastern tale of sage Ahikar. Both stories portray their protagonist, Aesop and Ahikar, as wise advisors to kings in Mesopotamia and Egypt. The narratives are strikingly similar, with the main distinction being the characters involved. For instance, in the Near Eastern version, Ahikar is a wise royal advisor, while in the Aesop romance, it's Aesop. Similarly, the kings of Assyria in Ahikar's story are replaced by Lycurgus, the Babylonian, in Aesop's tale. The characters of Ainos and Nectanebo in the Aesop romance have counterparts in Ahikar's story as well. The Ahikar story has been preserved in multiple languages, including Syriac, Arabic, Ethiopian, and Slavonic. While these versions were meticulously compiled and translated into English in the late 19th century, an ancient Aramaic rendition from the 5th century BCE was discovered in Egypt in 1907. It's believed that the origin of the Ahikar story might have even been older, possibly tracing back to the 7th century. The intricate relationship between the Aesop romance and the story of Ahikar is a topic I won't delve into here, drawing from a rich tapestry of narratives. What's particularly noteworthy for our current discussion is the presence of narrative elements familiar in the Near East, not just in the sections of the Aesop romance that align with the Ahikar's tales, but also in parts that feel distinctly Greek. For example, as Christiani says, in my prior essay, I highlighted a motif where a sacred cup is sneakily placed among Aesop's possessions by the antagonist, Delphians. This motif mirrors the biblical account in Genesis 44. Here, Joseph discreetly places his divination cup in his younger brother Benjamin's belongings. Later, he orchestrates its discovery, accusing Benjamin of theft. While the core motif remains consistent between the two stories, its application and significance diverge. In the Aesop romance, Aesop is the unfortunate victim of this deceit. The Delphians, having taken offense to Aesop's criticisms, frame him with the cup, leading to his arrest and eventual execution. Conversely, in the biblical tale, Joseph is the orchestrator, not the victim, of this ruse. He uses it as a strategy to retain his beloved younger brother Benjamin and to exert influence over and reprimand his other brothers who had wronged him. This variation in the utilization of a shared motif is not merely a matter of different narrative choices. It represents a deliberate structural inversion. The creators of these stories have taken a conventional element and applied it in diametrically opposite ways. This mirrored structure suggests a linkage between the two tales, even if it's not a direct one. It prompts us to analyze and appreciate the narrative in tandem. The comparison between the biblical Joseph story and the Oriental section of the Aesop romance reveals striking similarities and thematic parallels, suggesting shared cultural motifs and narrative structures. Here's a breakdown of the comparisons. Shared themes: foreigner and slave. Both Joseph and Aesop are portrayed as foreigners and slaves, emphasizing their outsider status and the challenges they face in foreign lands. wisdom and promotion. Both protagonists are recognized for their wisdom and knowledge, leading to their promotion by kings. Their lowly status juxtaposed with their wisdom creates a narrative tension. Unjust accusations. Both heroes face unjust accusations, imprisonment, and near-death experiences. However, they are eventually sought out by kings, whom they assist, leading to their exaltation. Shintod motif. Both narratives incorporate the theme of apparent death. Joseph is presumed dead early in his story, while Aesop is condemned to death but secretly survives. Differences and variations of a theme. Riddles versus dreams. Aesop solves riddles for the Egyptian king, while Joseph interprets dreams for Pharaoh. Both actions showcase their wisdom and unique abilities. Imprisonment locations. Aesop is hidden in an empty tomb, while Joseph is thrown into a dry cistern and later imprisoned in a dungeon. Both scenarios emphasize confinement and isolation, bridging differences with Ahikar. The Aramaic narrative about Ahikar provides a bridge between some differences in the Joseph story and the Aesop romance. For instance, while Jacob believes Joseph is dead due to the bloodied dress, Ahikar's execution is simulated by killing a eunuch slave, not an animal, as in the Joseph story. This presents a reversal in narrative dynamics. Reversal of motifs. In the Joseph story, the simulated death is a source of grief for Jacob. In contrast, Ahikar's simulated death is a ruse to satisfy a king's demand for his execution. This reversal highlights the flexibility and adaptability of shared narrative motifs across different cultural stories. The story of Joseph in the Bible has some striking similarities to the Aesop romance. Recently, scholars have been taking a closer look at the Joseph story. One of them, D.B. Redford, believes that the story has strong Egyptian influences. It might have been written between the 7th to 5th centuries BCE, while another scholar, A. Kitchen, disagrees with some of Redford's points. The idea that the Joseph story was written later than traditionally believed is gaining traction. Some argue that the story fits seamlessly into a larger narrative of Genesis, but even then, recent studies suggest that these stories might have been written no earlier than the 6th century BCE. This means that the Joseph story, the story of Ahikar, and the earliest versions of the Aesop romance might all have been crafted around the same time, between the 7th to 5th centuries BCE in the eastern Mediterranean region. Even if the Joseph story was written later, it still has roots in ancient tales. It seems to draw from older stories, like the Egyptian tale of the two brothers from the 19th dynasty. In this Egyptian story, two gods, Anpu and Bata, are portrayed as regular people, a married farmer and his single younger brother. This technique of turning godly myths into human stories isn't new. It's something we also see in the Hellenistic novels. The Joseph story is a perfect example of this, where age-old mythical themes are given a fresh, down-to-earth twist. The story of Ahikar, the Aesop romance, and the story of Joseph in the Bible all share narrative elements that can be traced back to ancient Near Eastern tales, especially those from Egypt. This means that the similarities between these three stories aren't just about the content or the time they were written. They all draw from a deep well of ancient storytelling traditions. Considering this intricate connection, it's fascinating to note that both Joseph and Aesop were seen as cultural icons. They had famous burial sites located in significant cultural centers like Delphi and Shechem. Even their names hint at shared history. While Joseph's name fits well within Semitic traditions, Aesop's name stands out as unusual in Greek stories. This raises questions about their shared origins, but that's a topic for another discussion. For now, it's intriguing to see the close relationship between the Aesop romance, which holds a special place in Greek storytelling, and the origins of the Hellenistic novel in the biblical tale of Joseph, the theme of the stolen cup. Continuing in this section, we will highlight the work of Cristiano Grottanelli, called Kings and Prophets, Monarchic Power, Inspired Leadership, Sacred Text in Biblical Narrative. This stolen cup theme is also echoed by Philip Wagenbaum in his work Argonauts of the Desert. When we dive deeper into the story of Joseph in the Bible, we see that its connections to Hellenistic and Roman narratives are just the tip of the iceberg. There are many elements in the Joseph story that can also be found in stories from these later periods. For instance, several Hellenistic and subsequent stories share motifs or themes with the biblical tale. I'll highlight just a few examples to give you an idea, but these should be enough to show that there's a broad tapestry of shared narratives and to set the stage for some broader observations. Let's delve into the stolen cup theme, which appears in both the story of Joseph and the Aesop romance, but with roles reversed. In the Bible, in Genesis 44, the story goes like this. Quote, Joseph instructed his house steward to fill the men's grain sacks and secretly place his silver cup in the youngest brother's sack. The next morning, as the brothers left the city, Joseph sent his steward to confront them about the stolen cup. When the steward caught up with them, he accused them of theft. The brothers, confident of their innocence, declared that if the cup was found with any one of them, that person should die, and the rest would become slaves. A search began, starting from the oldest brother's sack to the youngest. To their shock, the cup was discovered in Benjamin's sack. Distraught, they all returned to the city. In the Greek version, the Septuagint, the cup is referred to as kavdi. It also is worth noting the detail of donkeys carrying grain sacks. In the Aesop romance, the story is a bit different. Aesop is found with a cup that the people of Delphi had sneakily placed among his things. He's then arrested and condemned to death for this act of sacred theft. The incident of the hidden cup is narrated in strikingly similar ways in the two primary versions of the Aesop romance, known as Peri G and W texts. However, the G text includes a detail absent in the W version, but present in the biblical account of Joseph. When accused of theft, Aesop, much like Joseph's brothers in Genesis 44, proclaims his willingness to face death if the golden cup is found among his belongings. This declaration is a powerful testament to his innocence. Such a motif can be found in other Greek narratives and also in the Bible. For instance, in Genesis 32, Laban accuses Jacob of stealing his sacred idols, unaware that his wife Rachel has taken them. Jacob declares that whoever possesses the idols should not live. This curse might be the reason Rachel later dies during childbirth. In the Aesop romance, only Aesop's belongings are mentioned, with no reference to the sack of grain that conceals the sacred item, as in the Joseph story. This sack might be an Egyptian element, as a similar sack appears in the Middle Kingdom folktale from the Westcar Papyrus. In this tale, the priestess Regidet gives birth to 3 children fathered by the god Re. Assisting her are divine figures including the potter god Khnum and goddesses like Isis and Nephthys. These divine midwives name the children based on their birth circumstances and their destinies as future kings are set. As a token of gratitude, Regidet offers the deities a sack of barley. Instead of taking it with them, the deities hide 3 royal crowns inside and leave it with Regidet's servants. This sack is stored in a sealed room. 2 weeks later, when barley is needed for brewing beer, the room is filled with majestic sounds, revealing the sack's miraculous contents. The motif of the stolen cup in the Aesop romance, regardless of whether one agrees with its origin dating back to the 5th or 6th century BCE, is likely ancient. Herodotus briefly mentions Aesop's unjust death at the hands of the Delphians, without elaborating. However, Heracliades of Pontus, a student of Aristotle from the 4th century, specifically notes the placement of a golden cup in Aesop's belongings, leading to his execution as a sacrilegious thief. An annotation to Aristophanes' Wasp describes how the Delphians, after facing Aesop's criticism, concealed a sacred cup in his possessions, apprehending him en route to Phocis. Plutarch, in his De Sera Numinis Vindicta, vaguely mentions Aesop being accused of a sacrilegious act. Similarly, the quote, stolen cup, end quote, episode in the Joseph narrative has its roots. The biblical account of Benjamin's framing is echoed by numerous subsequent Jewish authors. These writers, both from Palestine and the Hellenistic diaspora, either provide commentary on the Joseph story in a midrashic style or introduced it to Greek-speaking audiences, many of whom were still Jewish. Flavius Josephus, in his Jewish Antiquities, elaborates on the biblical tale, introducing new elements. After dining with Joseph, the brothers were sent off with their grain. Joseph's steward was instructed to hide the payment in their sacks and to place Joseph's cherished drinking cup in Benjamin's sack. This was a test to see if the brothers would stand by Benjamin when accused of theft or abandon him. Confident of their innocence, as they departed joyfully with Simeon, they were suddenly ambushed by horsemen, accompanied by the servant who had planted the cup. The brothers, shocked by this sudden assault, questioned the reason for such aggression after recently experiencing Joseph's hospitality. The horsemen accused them of ingratitude, alleging they stole the cup Joseph used to toast their health. The brothers vehemently denied the accusation, but the cup was discovered in Benjamin's sack, leading to their collective despair. Benjamin was detained and brought to Joseph, with his brothers trailing behind. In Joseph's rendition, certain details differ from the biblical account. For instance, the term used for Benjamin's sack suggests it was typically used by pack animals. Joseph's cup, used for both drinking and divination in the Bible, is described as a loving cup for toasting. Joseph's motive for the ruse is to gauge his brother's loyalty. Additionally, the sudden appearance of horsemen, not mentioned in the Bible, adds drama to the narrative. Josephus' inclusion of horsemen in the Joseph narrative, which is not present in the original biblical account, demonstrates the flexibility with which even sacred text could be expanded upon. This adaptability is less surprising when we recognize that biblical texts themselves evolve through gradual additions, glosses, and segments. What's more intriguing is the appearance of similar horsemen in two renowned Hellenistic novels, both likely written less than a century after Josephus' account. In the Greek Ass novel, often credited to Lucian of Samosata, the protagonist Lucian, transformed into an ass through magic, is acquired by a band of eunuch devotees of the Syrian goddess. These devotees, wandering the countryside, perform peculiar religious acts. In one village, they insist that their goddess should reside in the temple of the most revered local deity. The villagers agree. After several days, the devotees decide to depart for a neighboring city. Before leaving, they retrieve their goddess from the temple. However, they also stealthily steal a golden bowl, a votive offering, hiding it within the statue of the goddess. The villagers, upon discovering the theft, chase the devotees, catching up to them. They find the stolen bowl concealed within the goddess's statue. The culprits are imprisoned, the goddess is relocated to another temple, and the golden vessel is returned to the village's deity. A parallel episode is found in Apuleius' golden ass. Here, the local goddess from the Greek text is replaced by the Phrygian Mater Deum, another Eastern deity. The sacred vessel is described as an Orium Canthorum. The Galli, like Joseph's brothers in both the Bible and Josephus' version, depart at dawn, likely to evade detection. The narrative is crafted with enhanced finesse. The sudden appearance of the horsemen, unexplained until their intervention, heightens the drama. The stolen golden cup is discovered ipso deo gremio, the very lap of the goddess. The culprits, while downplaying their wrongdoing, are captured, returned to the village, and incarcerated. The divine statue and the vessel are then reconsecrated and placed in the local temple. These episodes, while rooted in the stolen cup motif, showcase the adaptability of ancient narratives, allowing authors to infuse their unique perspectives and cultural context into familiar tales. The presence of the stolen cup motif in various narratives, from the biblical tale of Joseph to the Greek ass stories and the Aesop romance, underscores its adaptability and enduring appeal. However, pinpointing the exact origins and chronology of these tales, especially in relation to each other, is challenging. For instance, while there were likely multiple Greek ass narratives, one closely resembling Lucian's text, it's hard to determine the exact timeline of these stories, especially in relation to Josephus' expanded account of Benjamin's framing. Similarly, establishing a direct link between the ass tale episode and Aesop's unfortunate incident in Delphi is complex. Despite these challenges in tracing the motif's history, we can engage in a comparative analysis of this function and meaning and specific details across different narratives. In terms of function and meaning, the Joseph and Aesop stories can be grouped together. Both depict the motif as a means to ensnare and punish the innocent individual. Furthermore, Benjamin's unique position in the Joseph narrative, being both the favored son and the scapegoat, might be linked to the motif's suggested Egyptian origins. In the Westcar Papyrus, this motif symbolizes divine selection and royal authority. It's worth noting that just before the silver cup incident in the biblical account, Benjamin receives a portion from Joseph's table that's 5 times larger than his brothers, symbolizing royal favor. This is further emphasized in other biblical passages related to the Benjamite king Saul. Conversely, in 2 versions of the ass tale, the motif serves to expose and punish a band of blasphemous rogues. Their reactions upon being caught starkly contrast with the genuine responses of Joseph's brothers or Aesop. This highlights that while the Joseph and Aesop stories share similarities in the use of the motif, they also exhibit significant differences, which can be seen as a structural inversion. In essence, the stolen cup motif, while consistent in its core elements, is employed in diverse ways across narratives, reflecting the unique themes and messages of each story. The stolen cup motif, while consistent in its essence, exhibits a myriad of intricate details that vary across different narratives. These details, while seemingly minor, forge connections between the stories, transcending their broader themes and functions. For instance, the stolen vessel in the Joseph story is a silver cup, while in other narratives, it's golden. Its significance also varies. In the biblical account, it's a dual-purpose cup for drinking and divination, owned by the influential Joseph. In Josephus' version, it's solely for drinking, while in other tales, it's a sacred cup tied to a sanctuary. The presence of donkeys, essential in the biblical story and implicitly in Josephus, is absent in Aesop's traditions but re-emerges in the ass tale. Aesop's proclamation of innocence in one version of his story mirrors the brothers in Genesis. The motif of pursuers depicted as horsemen is consistent in Josephus and the ass tales. These intricate overlaps and deviations suggest a vast backdrop of shared narrative traditions, both Oriental and Greek. These stories aren't isolated but are interconnected fragments of a larger tapestry of tales that have evolved over time and across cultures. One intriguing connection is the association of the stolen vessel with grain. In the biblical Joseph story, donkeys carry sacks of grain, a detail still present in Josephus' account. This grain-carrying motif might have Egyptian roots, as seen in a tale where a sack holds barley and 3 royal crowns. In the ass tale, the stolen cup isn't concealed in a sack, but within a statue's tunic. However, the grain motif persists. In the Greek version, the religious beggars receive various cereals, including barley for their ass and wheat for themselves. Apuleius, in his rendition, elaborates that the beggars receive different grains, which they place in sacks on the ass's back. Thus, the ass becomes both a mobile temple and granary. While the stolen cup's position shifts across tales, the association of the sacred vessel with cereal remains constant. The story of Joseph in the Bible contains many parallels to ancient myths and narratives from the ancient Near East and Greece. As we've seen, the themes of separation, journey, and eventual reunion in Joseph's tale resonate with the nostos structure found in Homer's Odyssey. Both Joseph and Odysseus exemplify the romance genre through their extended absences, divine favor, and poignant recognition scenes. Dreams, trickery, and mastery of language links these 2 legendary figures. The stolen cup motif bridges Eastern and Western traditions, appearing in Egyptian folklore, the Bible, accounts of Aesop, and Greek novels. While the Bible's authors adapted these shared narrative elements to their own purposes, the influences reveal an interconnected cultural palette. Joseph's story continues to captivate us today, with its blend of universal motifs and distinctive perspectives. I hope you've enjoyed this exploration of the mythic roots and connections woven into the biblical tapestry. Please subscribe to MythVision for more comparative mythology content. I appreciate your likes, comments, and support on Patreon as we unravel the threads linking humanity's treasures of tales. Join me next time as we sample another flavor from this diverse banquet of world myths and sacred stories. And never forget, we are MythVision.